Jonathan, can you hear me? You're going to have to come back towards the door and give me the hi sign. Yeah? Okay, so it's fine on the phone. Okay.
I can hear on.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and help us get launched into today's meeting. Welcome. Please help yourselves to lunch. Everybody in the room is welcome to take food. There's a lot of Qdoba, so please help yourselves. There's also some desserts for break, or if you just need to refresh in the middle of the afternoon, please help yourselves. Feel free to just wander over at any point. With that, I just want to pass to Allison and Robert as he's taking a bite. Sorry about that, Robert. I timed that perfectly to say hello and welcome the subcommittee back. Oh, just as a reminder about microphones. So there are mics on each table. You push the button to unmute them to green. They do not project into the space the way that this microphone does, but people on the phone are telling us that they can hear through those mics. So for one another, it'll be important to project if you're not standing up here. But for the sake of those on the phone, if we can consistently use the microphones, please.
Fantastic. Hello and welcome back, everybody. I really appreciate you guys being here. I've been involved in, hearing about what other subcommittees are doing, and it seems like we are really diving in much quicker than other subcommittees have been able to, and that's obviously because we have the proposed plan to start from and the special master's report. So I think having the special masters here today is going to be really helpful for all of us. And I want folks to keep in mind that neither the special masters nor this subcommittee is here to make sure we get compliance with the lawsuit as quickly as possible. Obviously, that is one objective, but we're not that short-term focused. We definitely want to be focused on what is going to help the state get in the right position so that we don't have to have another lawsuit, or we don't have to continue to incur fines. And so we really want to be looking long-term, and we want to be looking at what is sustainable and appropriate for individuals. And so I know this setting can be intimidating or uncomfortable for people, but we really, really want to encourage people who haven't spoken up previously to share their thoughts, particularly people with lived experience or family members. We don't want to come up with a system that we all think is good on behalf of people without hearing from people. So that point is really, really important, and I just want to mention that. So we'd love to hear from whether it's public folks or people on the subcommittee. That is something really important for our Disability Law Colorado and the subcommittee, I think, to be looking at.
Well said. I don't think I have much to add other than we'll hear from the special masters and those folks. When we do introductions, Dr. Thompson from Louisiana can introduce himself as well when we do introductions. So we have another guest who is well-versed in the forensic system and runs a similar system in Louisiana. So we can hear from them as well if you have questions about what Louisiana does as it compares to Colorado as we get to sort of into the conversations. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Start with introductions.
Yeah, we can just do some quick introductions. I'll just remind you to please hit the button so your microphone turns green so people on the phone who are joining us remotely can hear you, and we can just go around the room and brief introductions.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. John Thompson. I'm the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Tulane. Started the Tulane Forensic Fellowship and have helped run the state hospital, the forensic hospital in Louisiana since 1993. So hopefully I'll get to chime in every once in a while. Thanks.
Rick Martinez from the University of Colorado School of Medicine, director of the forensic psychiatry program there. And John and I are old friends, and invited him up for a few days to meet with some folks here and see what we can learn from his expertise down in Louisiana.
Hi there, Jennifer Bundrick, University of Colorado Medical School. I'm one of the associate program directors for the Forensic Psychiatry Fellowship.
Sasha Roy, I'm a psychiatrist at Denver Sheriff's Department of Health Services.
Carly Salem, Mental Health Center Denver's Crisis Intervention Response Unit.
Corey Robinson Rosenberg, University of Colorado School of Medicine, specializing in developmental disabilities, autism.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Derek Harvey, and I'm a chief of police with Canyon City, Colorado's Police Department, and also on the executive board for the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Harris. I work for the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. We are the executive agency that runs Colorado's Medicaid program. I'm the interim program manager for the Accountable Care Collaborative, which oversees the regional accountable entities. So we manage the capitated behavioral health benefit for 1 in 4 Coloradans.
Good morning. My name is Lucy Ohanian. I'm a Colorado State Public Defender. My role is Chief Deputy, so I work in an administrative role and are often assisting and supporting our lawyers and representing people who are facing competency issues in their cases.
Good morning, Robert Worthwine, Director for the State Office of Behavioral Health.
Hi, Allison Butler from Disability Law Colorado. I'm Director of Legal Services.
Lacey Bruman, and I'm the Research Scientist and Director for TrackTech.
Hi, Renee Marquardt with CDHS. You gotta turn it on. Renee Marquardt with CDHS. No, it's on. Once again, Renee Marquardt with CDHS. My name's Joy Hart. I'm with the Colorado Department of Corrections. I'm the Chief of Behavioral Health Services.
My name is Sue Coffey. Good morning. I'm a parent and facilitator for AF.
My name is Mary Thomas, and I have a experience.
Afternoon, good morning. My name is Brian Gonzalez, and I'm with the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Denver. I'm the Assistant Dean and Faculty.
Hi, I'm Daniel Murray. I'm from the University of Virginia, but I'm here in the role of Special Master. I'll be talking to you soon.
Neil Goen-Smith, the other court-appointed Special Master.
Hi, I'm Gilchrist, Farley Health Policy Center.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Kirshner. I'm also with the Farley Health Policy Center. And we are here just to make everything go smoothly today. We have a couple of subcommittee members and a few members of the public who are joining us by Zoom. So Laura Warner, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the room?
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Laura. I'm Laura Warner from San Juan Basin Public Health.
And Callie.
Good morning. This is Callie Toll with Summit Stone Health Partners, Director of Forensic Services there.
Welcome. And Rena.
This is Rena Shaner with the lived experience on the Western Slope.
Welcome. Thank you. And please, those of you on the phone, you guys are getting pretty good at this about muting and unmuting yourselves. If you're having any trouble getting into the room on audio, you can always chat to Emma. She's going to be monitoring that throughout the meeting. And so we see you and we will hear you and include you in the discussion today. So thank you for joining. So just a quick housekeeping. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi.
Sorry I walked in late.
No, it's okay.
I'm not Moses Gurr. I'm his proxy today. My name is Frank Cornelia. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Strategy Officer for the Colorado Behavioral Healthcare Council. We represent Colorado's managed service organizations and community mental health centers. Thank you.
Please help yourself to lunch. Hi, Jessica. Sorry, as you're walking in, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Jessica Russell. I'm the Director of Custom Recovery Services at Health Solutions in Pueblo.
Welcome. Did I miss anybody else? Okay. So quick housekeeping, we just need to get the minutes from the last meeting approved. They were posted and we have copies of them. So as hopefully everyone was able to see them. And so from what was distributed, are there any corrections that anyone wants to offer to the minutes? Yeah, we're watching. I'm making sure. Okay. Are any opposed? All right, then I think the motions are approved, or the minutes are approved. Thank you. So the objectives today. This is kind of a longer meeting, and so we are excited to have the Special Masters team here to walk us through the report and answer any questions you have, and make sure that this subcommittee is really feeling comfortable in how this is related to the work ahead for us. And then we'll take a break and come back to the work we began at our last subcommittee meeting, and really finalizing up the recommendations related to Intercept 3. We had planned to do some of this in survey. I think going through, we didn't quite get through them last month, and we were going pretty fast. So we decided to revisit again in the remaining time we have today, and then we'll finalize again kind of in a more concise manner through a survey to the subcommittee. So that's kind of the plan for the day. And with that, I can pass the baton to the Special Masters team. And Alice, I think you're going to do a little grounding in terms of why the anything you want to add in addition to your introduction.
Oh, sorry, it was on. No, I didn't know when that was going to happen, so I pushed it all into the beginning. And basically what I just wanted to reiterate is that these folks were hired during the federal court case and appointed by the federal judge, but they are definitely viewing their task as broader than just compliance with the lawsuit. The point with the lawsuit isn't just to have short-term solutions, either from Disability Law Colorado or from CDHS. I think everybody understands that what we need to do is look at more longer-term solutions to the problems. And so I just wanted people to be focused on that when they're going through the report and the proposed plan from CDHS and sort of in their questions to the Special Masters. We're not just looking for quick short-term, we're looking for quick long-term, I guess.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'll start us off very briefly and then turn it over to Dan to introduce ourselves more formally. Thank you very much for having us to this important meeting. This is one of the more important initiatives going on in Colorado in the past several years, trying to understand how best to serve people with mental illness who are caught up in the criminal justice system. Competency to stand trial or competency to proceed in Colorado is where the funnel leads for many of these people. We know that there are a lot of stories and lived experiences that aren't captured by the competency process. Our job is really narrowly focused on competency, but we understand that there's a ripple effect and that it doesn't exist in a vacuum or in isolation. So we're super honored to be here to be able to talk about our role and our perspectives on this issue. I will say one quick thing before I turn it over to Dan is that don't feel shy about getting food. Yesterday we were presenting and it was at the end of the day and they said, basically when you guys are finished, we can all leave and go eat. So yet again, we're competing with food, but it's okay. Go ahead and get your food if you're hungry in the middle of the presentation. That's fine too. We anticipate about an hour, go till about 12:30 is our plan.
Yeah. Do you mind? Okay. Yeah. So we're, I mean, I guess just by way of introduction, as Allison said, we have found ourselves in this special master role. I think most of you know kind of the story of how this came to be. You understand the litigation that was there. As that litigation was approaching trial, the court appointed us in the special master role, and then the parties moved into a mediation that, in our view, was just remarkable. Sure. Yeah. Was just remarkable, the mediation, for the degree to which both sides really gave a lot. All parties were thoughtful and creative, and really moved much faster and much more constructively than some other processes like that elsewhere. So we walked away from that very still daunted by the challenges, but very optimistic about the path forward. And then, as you know, that moved into a consent decree. The consent decree has been influential in recent legislation and in other work. And so this is sort of where we find ourselves is helping the department in these matters, and really want to underscore what Allison said, that our concern, I think, from moment one was that Colorado not do a panicky, reactionary let's hurry up and get compliance in whatever way we can, and just get this litigation taken care of. That is rarely the way to get to a long-term solution. And sometimes it's the position agencies find themselves in, is having to do that. But we're very interested, and it sounds like everyone here is very interested in making things better, not just quick and dirty compliance, but true, thoughtful, long-term system change. And so that's what we really want to try to be useful in. So I guess introductions, individually, just so you know a little bit about where we're coming from. Both of us are licensed clinical psychologists who've really devoted our careers to forensic services in one way or another. I work quite far from here most of the time at the University of Virginia, where I lead a place called the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy. This is kind of an interdisciplinary combination of the law school and the med school. So I have academic work there, researching and consulting on issues like this, forensic services, forensic evaluation. I do not have a state administrative role, but rather consult with our state. And then to the side of all that, work in forensic evaluation in other contexts, and in particular work with Neil under what's called groundswell services, doing consultations to states, agencies, other jurisdictions, primarily around competence issues, or at least forensic services more broadly. So these kinds of issues are very, very dear to us. I'll let Neil give his introduction.
Just a little bit more about my particular experience. I'm also a clinical psychologist focusing on forensic psychology my entire career. Completed a postdoctoral fellowship in forensic psychology at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and then was hired in Hawaii to be the state's first forensic coordinator, which it opened me to a lot of things, one of which is the seeds for the forensic support team that's currently going through orientation here in Colorado. But in Hawaii, as the forensic coordinator, I was hired to track, monitor, assess, provide some services to people who were not guilty by reason of insanity and subsequently released from the hospital to the community. And it was an eye-opening challenge. The first thing they asked me to do was figure out who was on conditional release in the first place. I mean, this is a tough place to start. It kind of showed me right from the beginning, this is a fractured system, and the public forensic mental health system has got a long way to go to making this work efficiently and adequately for the people that we're serving. I took over the Forensic Services Division a couple of years later, became the chief of the Forensic Services for Hawaii, and oversaw all of the forensic services that we provided, created an outpatient competency restoration program, a mental health court, jail diversion program, CIT, a really robust conditional release monitoring function, and was really proud to work with some really talented people there to develop a system that worked much better than what I inherited. Forward a little bit, I moved to Colorado. We had kids, and boy, Hawaii is tough sometimes if you're not from there with kids. And so we Paradise Lost. We moved to Denver, which is fantastic as well. Not Hawaii, but it's still fantastic. And I became half-time professor at the University of Denver, teaching forensic psychology, and a half-time competency evaluator for the state, working for OBH as a competency evaluator, which gave me a nice window into how competency starts to look in Colorado, right in the trenches. As Dan mentioned, I'm also the president of Groundswell Services, which is a private practice on the side, deals mostly with consulting on competency-related issues for various states around the country. We have several slides on the role of the special master. We're not going to go into these in any great depth. To be quite frank, hate the term special master. It drives me crazy when I have to sign a piece of paper that says I'm the special master, because I feel like it's just such a wacky term. If my kids want to call me the special master, I'll allow that. But for folks in the room and anybody else, just call me Neil and call Dan Dan. That's what we prefer. I'm going to turn it over to Dan just to give a little bit of an overview of how we view our role as special masters as defined in the consent decree.
Yeah, so the consent decree does spell this out a good bit, and I won't belabor that. But at least on paper, the job is largely reviewing and approving department plans, recommending methods, advising, nudging, overseeing. There's a way in which these roles are sometimes sort of like this kind of like obnoxious person looking over the shoulder or tattling when things aren't right. Robert's smiling, which makes me worry that rings really true. We're hoping not for it to be like that, right? It's not really supposed to be the court's tattletale exactly, or at least that's not what we're hoping. We really are hoping this will be kind of a collaborative, coaching, advising type of process. It's definitely not a role for two people coming in with all the answers. I am particularly coming, from outside Colorado and really have a lot to learn about the system. But it is a role for two people who have worked with other systems, who have seen things work and not work in other states, who have spent a lot of time in actual competence evaluations and researching and thinking about these. So we really want to think of ourselves more as part of the team, collaborating, consulting, being a bit maybe nitpicky and frustrating sometimes, but hopefully we certainly feel like part of the team working on this. And I guess the other thing we want to make clear in that is that we do not see this as coming into some kind of broken system that's starting at square one and just needing rescued somehow. That's absolutely not the case. Colorado is a system that really has a lot of strengths to begin with. There have definitely been other states we have gone into and felt very differently about the resources and strengths available, places that really do feel like they're starting in square one or starting a few decades ago. Colorado is not that way. There's quite a bit of good here, and maybe we'll just review some of that. Here's an overview of what we see as existing strengths, but there's quite a bit to build from here.
I think it's weird to share one microphone, so we're just going to kind of keep bouncing back and forth. The presentation that we're going to go through, we'll start with this kind of strengths, where we are when we kind of walked into this role, where we are in 2019, the things that are working for us. And then the second half, the heart of the presentation really is going to be what are our perspectives on gaps that exist in Colorado, and how are other states trying to address those gaps? What are some of the things that we're trying to bring to the table in Colorado? But let's start with the good news first. So OBH does have a Department of Forensic Services. Some states don't, right? And what that helps tremendously to have an office of Forensic Mental Health Services, because it allows for greater coordination, better efficiency, better information dissemination. Everybody can be on the same page. If you have an Office of Forensic Services, you have a housed place for expertise, for networking, for harnessing different things that are happening in the forensic field, and then getting that word out to everyone in the forensic system efficiently and effectively. Without it, you sort of have various people trying to fill in that role, and some people are more experienced than others, and sometimes the communication is just fractured and it doesn't work well. So kudos to Colorado for having this in place from the moment we started walking into this.
Yeah, and very similar is having the forensic service director already, right? Forensic services, as you know, are by definition at the intersection of two systems, right? Mental health and legal. And in many places historically, that has meant that forensic patients fall in this gap between the two systems, right? It doesn't usually mean that they're getting the best of services from both systems. It means that they're kind of falling between. And so a forensic office, a forensic director helps preclude some of those problems. The director here just hired Jagrudi Shah, who, again, as an outsider, has been interesting for me. I've never met Jagrudi before this experience, and came into all sorts of people sort of gushing about how good she will be in this position. So that's been very encouraging.
Dan, can I just ask Jagrudi to stand up and say hello? Because you'll see Jagrudi a lot through our conversation. So.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm certainly excited to take on this role. I've been in the field for long enough. Worked with the jails a lot over the last decade. prosecutors there, but more of a focus on the community.
Thank you, Jagruti, and thank you, Robert. There's been a lot of good legislation leading up to this moment in this past session as well. I'm not going to belabor this, but all the way, starting with the recent past, 2017, 2018, formalizing outpatient competency restoration to occur, who's in control of it, who gets the funding for it, who's responsible to pull it off, OBH. And then in 2018, 3 bills out of 4 passed regarding competency, and they provided funding for pretrial diversion services, the Bridges Court Liaison Program, which is operated by the State Court Administration, as well as an expansion of jail-based behavioral mental health services to a greater population in jails. All of these things not directly targeted on competency, but certainly start to fill in some of those gaps that existed for the folks who found themselves in that situation. Of course, most recently, Senate Bill 223, which was passed this past session. I'm not going to go through this. I believe most of you are fairly familiar with 223. The overall, there are a lot of things mandated in 223 that had not existed before. We were very supportive of 223 and we're pleased with the coalition of support that was gathered behind 223. Not a perfect bill, but it certainly advanced things in the right direction. I think the most significant forensic mental health legislation in many, many years in Colorado. The main thrust of Senate Bill 223 is looking at, as Jagruti mentioned, an eye towards the community. That for too long, Colorado has focused on SIMHIP, the hospital down in Pueblo, as the answer for forensic mental health. If a person was incompetent, send them to SIMHIP. If a person is in GRI, put them in SIMHIP and let's wash our hands and move on. That's the old way of doing things, and it's an expensive way to do things, and it restricts people's civil liberties. It puts people in behind doors that may not need to be behind a door, right? And so we're really pleased with Senate Bill 223 in advancing competency to the community, trying to make the default community forensic services rather than the hospital as the default forensic mental health services. And so there's a lot of codified language in 223 that we'll dig into in other places in this presentation that are really meant to try and make the community a default for services rather than shunting them to the hospital with no other options.
And if I may just say one thing, 223 is in your binder, so if you have questions about exactly what it says, you can check out your binder.
So also, in terms of other strengths that Colorado has up and running, this community-based competence restoration is a big one. You know, as you know, around the country, other states are struggling with a competence crisis, it's sometimes called, long delays, long wait lists. For almost every state that has made good progress, outpatient restoration is a part of the answer. It's not the whole answer, it doesn't fit everybody, but it's almost always part of the answer. And so we came into this with Colorado already having this, right? This is something we've had to really push for and argue for in other systems. Colorado had it. It had recently begun up and running. It is growing and increasing, but this is a tremendous asset we'll talk more about. It yields this kind of continuum of services. And this is really what an ideal modern progressive system looks like, right? Is a system that kind of matches people's needs. And for some, that is absolutely inpatient-based restoration. That's absolutely what some portion of defendants need. But jail-based is an appropriate fit for others when it is done well and done right. I believe RISE is a really good example of this being done right. That there are certainly times and places where jail-based restoration is not so good. I don't think RISE is one of them. And then community-based restoration, right, to kind of fill out that spectrum. Just like we do in other types of mental health services, we want to have this spectrum. And this exists. This infrastructure is already here.
Another thing that exists in Colorado that some places are still trying to work through and push towards is pretrial diversion. So we know in SB 18, I think it was 249, I'm not sure the number exactly, provided some additional funding for some of these pretrial diversion programs, co-responder programs, the LEAD programs, coordination with Denver County to pull together a targeted assertive community treatment restoration model here, kind of a pilot program in Denver. There's a lot of really good things happening in Denver. So when we start to talk about the gaps, let's not forget about some of these other things that exist.
Similarly, evaluation practices are probably a strength here, or at least something that was off to a good start before this litigation. You know, as you probably know, historically, even all evaluations were done in hospitals. People were shipped off far away to sit for 30 or 60 days and get an evaluation done, when sometimes for some people, just really a half a day was all that was necessary. It's very expensive to do things that way. It's very disrespectful of somebody's liberties. That was the model. And probably about 30 years ago, some states started to push against that. Virginia, the state I'm in, was one of the first and developed a big system around that. Colorado has already moved into this outpatient evaluations in jails in the community, just like many other states. In fact, probably most other states at this point. There's been a court service evaluator unit that has been pretty cohesive, has had pretty good oversight. It involves annual trainings. So this good infrastructure has been there. I've spent some time recently reviewing all the reports from this court services. Generally, these are good. They look favorable compared to other states I've seen. Are all evaluations perfect? No, of course not. But generally, the system is pretty strong with respect to evaluations. This is not a gross deficit that needs fixed. There's some good work there already.
This may be the last strength that we're going to cover. I've kind of lost track of how many strengths we have because there's so many. Forensic training programs, good academic collaborations. Obviously, we have evidence of that with Rick Martinez here and John Thompson from Tulane. Probably some other folks in the room have benefited from these kinds of academic collaborations that the department has had with various universities, locally in Colorado most strongly, but then branching out for training opportunities or other kind of information as required. So postdoctoral fellowship programs in forensic psychiatry, forensic psychology, housed at SIMHEP, for example, the pre-doctoral internship in forensic psychology and the postdoctoral fellowship there in forensic psychology, and then collaborating with Dr. Martinez Forensic Psychiatry Fellowship through the University of Colorado. These are really strong collaborations and really important to make sure that not just that the training for potential workforce is good, but that the knowledge for how to do evaluations and how to understand the public forensic mental health service system needs and solutions is really translating from the best minds around the country and the world and infusing that information and knowledge down into Colorado. That's where we started, right? That's kind of phase one of the presentation, and I don't want to be glib about it. These things really are strengths of Colorado. We should feel good about where we have strengths long-standing, but there are some other gaps. And so when Dan and I were asked to come in and review the plan from the department back in late 2018 and provide a response, kind of had a 7-point response. It said, here are the things where we feel there are room for significant improvement. And so we're going to go through those 7 points for the rest of our presentation, really digging into each one of them and trying to help the room understand and the folks on the call understand why this is a gap in Colorado, why it's so important, and how what solutions might exist to start to fill in those gaps. Is that fair?
Absolutely. All right. And again, my impression is you all have seen much. You've certainly seen the consent decree. You may have seen our report before that. It's available. Okay, I'm sure everybody's read that cover to cover. Right. So this, you know, for those of you who are avid readers, maybe this is redundant, but this is a sense of where we're coming from, right, and what we saw when we came in. The first, you know, and I think this is going to echo some of what Allison said earlier. The first is that there just needs to be a comprehensive, cohesive plan. Litigation is in some ways great because it makes things happen that might not have happened otherwise. It makes legislatures free up money that they wouldn't have otherwise. But in some ways, litigation is terrible because it really, it just urges a response to the immediate crisis or the immediate subject of litigation. And it really almost detracts from people stepping back and saying, hey, what's like the big picture here, right? What do we really need to work on most broadly? What would be ideal? And so, you know, we come in a little bit unrealistically saying, hey, I know there's this litigation that's saying do X right now, but we're going to say slow down and take a big, broad plan. Don't just think about the immediate crisis, but think what's going to help long term, what's going to be sustainable. Any quick fixes usually come at a high price down the road, and we don't want to do that, right? We want to have fixes that are, of course, as fast as they can be, but make things better over the long haul, right? All right, and really the department has jumped on this very, very early. So a drafted plan was developed in the spring, got more and more refined. There was kind of a big work day back in the spring, developed into sort of a draft or a model that you see now, that you've been working on, that follows this sequential intercept model that so many of you know, and really kind of allows us to dig in to each intercept and think about how the system might best be improved at each level. This is the kind of slow, painstaking process that's really helpful for a broad plan, and you all are in the thick of it right now. I'm delighted to see that.
One more thought about the plan. Obviously, this is a big task that the group has here, is to respond at the end of this task, or this committee, this task force, with a similar plan and set of recommendations. I think it's going to flow very nicely hand in hand with the department's plan. The department is required to come up with by consent decree, with their comprehensive and cohesive plan, January of 2020. The timing is really ideal that these things are happening kind of simultaneously. I believe the department's plan is not going to be it's not going to be a carbon copy of the plan that's developed in the governor's task force. Probably will have more nitty-gritty detail and that sort of thing, but I think it's going to be pretty close.
Well, the way we're approaching is this committee will provide input, what's missing, what they would like to see removed or add as we go forward. So it will be the same plan, except that this committee will be asked to keep thinking about things even after the plan that are outside of just the plan itself. Things like charges and who should go forward, and things that are beyond the department's control. So this committee will be weighing in on this plan as far as what they think is missing or adding. But remember, this plan is really limited to the department. So after this plan is completed, this committee is being asked to think about all the other elements that are beyond the department that contribute to competency.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, I agree. So it actually really, the plan is to just have one plan, work from theirs, and change and modify as the group deems appropriate.
That's even better news. Yeah. And I'm so excited to have the interest and the representation that we have here in this committee. It's really, really solid. I think the plan is started a really good jumping off point, and looking forward to seeing how that gets refined over the next several months. One of the things that we addressed in our response to the department's plan was this emphasis of community services over inpatient services. Now, when I say that, it's important to remember that inpatient services are a critical part of the continuum of care for competency services. There is no way that you could close the state hospital at Pueblo and adequately address the needs of people across the state who have competency-related needs. Some people need an inpatient stay. They do. And in fact, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest there's not enough beds to begin with, right? So although you can't build yourself out of this problem, as we've seen in other states who have tried to build another hospital wing or build another hospital in a different part of the state, they fill up like that, and then they're back looking at another wait list. If you build it, they will come. The answer is not just to build beds. The answer is to build enough beds and create additional capacity for people that don't need those beds. And so, yes, we're supportive of the department plan to continue to expand the bed capacity at SimHIP and beyond. That's critically needed. But that answer can't stop there, right? And we need to look at what other services could fill the needs for everyone in the system, not just those who need inpatient services. So comprehensive approach requires providing both inpatient beds and community resources while using thoughtful guidelines to determine which deserves which. Yes, Robert. Okay, this is the last slide on this. Do you want to chime in? We have been impressed by several states that have this model. And Colorado moving in this direction, as we've already discussed to some degree. A great example is found in Phoenix, Arizona, in Maricopa County, Arizona, in which they have a really well-run and well-used diversion drop-off center for this population. We're looking kind of upstream. Remember, think about the sequential intercept model that some of you have heard about, that's kind of the foundation of the department's plan so far. Things happen in sequence. It's a linear sequence. You have a mental health problem, and the police may be called, or you go to the hospital, and then if the charges are levied, then you're arrested, and then you go to court, and then you go to jail or the hospital, or both, and then you get out, and it happens sequentially. You can also think about it as a funnel. And the top of the funnel meaning the beginning of that sequential process. And at the top of that funnel, there's a lot more options and flexibility for a person who's experiencing a mental health crisis. They may not need to have the police called right away. They may not need to be arrested, even if they are on the edge, that blurry line between legality and illegality. There's a lot of flexibility there. But once the charge is levied, once it's a certain level of charge, once the competency evaluation is ordered, once they're ordered to receive that evaluation in a jail or the hospital, the funnel just starts to shrink, and you have fewer and fewer options as you go down. So this is what's so helpful about a program like this in Maricopa County. It's right at the lip of that funnel, trying to get people who might otherwise go to the competency route out of that system entirely. So it's a drop-off center. It's coordinated well with their crisis intervention teams, which are strong in Phoenix, mobile crisis team, a crisis hotline, those systems working together to help support an urgent psychiatric center. It's a standalone facility, and they see about 500 plus people per month that are brought in by police, brought in by hospital, or brought in by case managers, sometimes by family. They have some nice, I think, 50-something recliners in there, and they help people through their mental health crisis, generally thought to be a 24-hour crisis center, but some people can have their stays extended for several days. And what it does is it provides multiple benefits. Sometimes it avoids a criminal act from occurring, which is a really important outcome. Obviously resolves mental health crisis if need be, or if possible. Makes referrals to other hospital systems in lieu of a criminal charge when possible. And it also works great for the officers. Instead of spending 3 hours in the ER trying to get something done, they can go to the drop-off center and have a 7-minute interaction and get back on the beat, which is where they want to be, spending their time more wisely. So this is not probably something we're going to pick up and put in Denver or put in Colorado Springs. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to learn from and borrow from other places that seem to have these kinds of diversion systems working and programs working better than what we have in Colorado currently. Robert.
Yeah, so do you know if there's any agreements with DAs about diversion or any sort of low-level charge diversion programs that the person's compliant to treatment?
In Colorado or anywhere? Yeah, okay. So the question is sort of the buy-in from DAs about just missing charges or letting charges go. It varies. Yes, there are some. That's the kind of the predicate of jail diversion, right? Is low-level charges. The DAs will come to the table and agree these charges were eligible or legally suitable. These charges are not. And so, yeah, if a person comes in and is able to complete that pre-trial diversion program successfully, they have terms and conditions that they've got to go through. If they do that for a certain amount of time and do it to the number, then those charges can be dropped. So sure, there's plenty of examples where DAs have been able to agree upon that.
And this is a preference question. Would you prefer us to ask questions about sections at the end, or?
I probably prefer to hold them to the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, we may. So, and I see the public defender face saying, no. That's fine, right? So this is, right, understood. I think as Neil says, we'll sprinkle examples throughout here just to say, look, here's an idea. Here's what's working on this place. Part of what you do is kick around how well it can work here. I think we've seen this kind of DA response very differently. I have seen places where prosecutors are very traditional, very reluctant on this. We also had an experience where we went into a state meeting one time and thought this was going to be this really big, hard sell, and The DAs were already talking about, no, we meet, we look at what we can drop, and we were sort of floored. So there are these cultural differences across states. I assume deeply within states, you might have jurisdictions that buy into this very different. And of course, that's a factor in where you launch what, right? No doubt about that. And you all will know that better than we will, right? This is why we haven't used this.
Third major point that we wanted to address in our response is prioritizing outpatient restoration. So at this point, probably sounding a bit like a broken record, just with the details a little bit differently. Maybe it's a different song on the same record. But we're looking at outpatient restoration. And as Dan mentioned, it existed in Colorado, but the beginnings were there. The legislation was there to allow for it. The funding and the resources had not been devoted to it when we walked in. And what we want to see is, sure, we want to affirm that the department has started off on the right track, but there's a lot of untapped potential with outpatient restoration in Colorado. Outpatient restoration works extremely well. We've developed these programs in many states, and they consistently work quite well if you put the right folks in the right programs. What we see is at the beginning opposition from prosecutors or the public or the judiciary regarding public safety concerns. These people are charged with a crime. If they're going to do something terrible in the community, why would we want to take that risk? Well, it's a conversation to be able to say, what kinds of risks are we willing to consider? Some jurisdictions, as Dan said, they consider a whole lot of charges. Some consider fewer. But what we can say is that the data across, I think, 18 different states now is very compelling. Very few negative incidences regarding violent crime or violent recidivism. If there is recidivism, it's usually the same sort of low-level nonviolent issues that have gotten people in trouble in the past. The other major issue is funding. It's so much cheaper or less expensive to run an outpatient program than it is an inpatient program. And so those two things are very compelling. Probably the most important reason from humanity is that it's the right thing to do. It goes along with Olmstead and our sense of morality, but there's no reason to put somebody behind a locked door if they don't need to be behind a locked door for public safety concerns. Quick comment?
Have you seen models where they've added resources to outpatient competency? Because I know that's been a big area, especially for rural Pueblo housing. People may be eligible, but we don't have any safe place for them to be housed, so they're more likely to not be successful.
That's a great comment. Let me say two things. No two models are alike, right? I did a survey in 2016, published it in 2016 or 2017, looking at the 16 different states that describe their different models. No two are alike. In Hawaii, we built a model where housing was part of the program. Some states, they don't offer housing. I think the states that show the best return on investment are those that provide a richer complement of resources. When housing is there, substance abuse treatment is there, case management and assertive treatment, those things tend to push the success rates higher. But it's not to say that it's not possible to hit good results without those things, but those things certainly help. Again, I appreciate the question, but if we could maybe try to hold them to the end. That's okay, it's a great question, but maybe just try to hold them to the end. Oh. One of the developments in Colorado in SB 223 is now court services evaluators, when they're doing their evaluation to opine on a person's competency or incompetency, are also asked to make a couple of opinions that they've never had to do before. It's a kind of a seismic shift or a sea change in the evaluation world in Colorado, asking evaluators to do three things. Is the person competent or not? That's always been there. The second thing that is now required that wasn't before is, if the person's incompetent, from a clinical perspective, should they go to an outpatient provider for restoration, or do they merit inpatient restoration? And evaluators have never had to answer that question in Colorado. Many states do. And that was one of the things that was somewhat contentious in SB 223, but got rectified with enough information from around the country. Say, look, these states seem to be able to do that. There's no reason we couldn't do that in Colorado. I came around on this issue. I was a little skeptical in the beginning, but now I'm a believer. The right training and the right resources, the right skill level, evaluators should be able to make this clinical call on, does the person need inpatient hospitalization, or can they manage outpatient? And so here what we see is a continuum from a clinical perspective. placement information from the court services evaluator is clinically targeted. We're not asking the evaluators in Colorado to ask about housing or what kind of case management service is going to be best available for that person. That's more for the Bridges liaison realm, right? They're doing more of the case management side of that placement decision. They provide that information to the court. What we're asking or what SB 223 is asking evaluators to do is just say, here's the person's diagnosis, here's their symptom presentation, here's their recent trajectory, here's what's happened with them in the past when they've been in similar circumstances. Do we need to put them in a hospital, or can they manage in the community? And what SB 223 does is lays the groundwork for making the default community. So the evaluators need to make an argument for inpatient rather than an argument for outpatient. And that's a big change. Do you want to say something about how this works in Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just another example to sprinkle in. Virginia made this shift fairly recently, probably 6 years ago, maybe, to really relying more on an outpatient restoration model. And I like this example because it demonstrates outpatient restoration, but it also demonstrates how you roll something out, right? How changes are really tough on systems, and you need to do this kind of front-end planning that sort of synchronizes a rollout across every stakeholder group. And so one of the things they did here when really trying to shift towards outpatient restoration, which again, like Colorado, had always been allowable, but it wasn't particularly common. It was very underutilized. First, they changed statute to basically say that outpatient restoration would be the default. Okay, and that's a big shift. If you just shift your default setting, that's huge. So outpatient is now the default. We don't assume people automatically go in the hospital. We assume they can be restored outpatient, and then we examine to think if they are an exception to that default, right? Do they need inpatient? For some people, absolutely. But if this is the outpatient, this is the default, that does kind of shift things already. Judges were basically trained to order outpatient unless there was a clinical or security reason for inpatient. And some judges took to this right away, just like we're talking about the diversity in systems. Some took to this right away. Some just kind of couldn't get it through their head for a while, right? Took a year to realize that people don't always just necessarily go to the hospital. So coordinated trainings for these judges. Also changed the statute to direct evaluators, right? So evaluators tasked with doing these, much like SB 223, now had to make this opinion, right? To understand that outpatient was the default, and then they would opine on whether inpatient was necessary. So it's sort of shifting the default for them. We then integrated trainings to them. So in our trainings to evaluators, it now became, okay, here's how you think through this new decision about inpatient or outpatient. First, you must offer this opinion, right? This is a new duty you have, and here's how you might think through it. So training them, and then developing a series of outpatient or jail-based restoration programs, contracting with places to do this, training all the community health centers to do this in uniform ways, right? So this part is rolled out uniformly as well. And again, the community mental health centers function a little bit differently there than here. So this isn't a perfect example, but the idea that everything is rolled out together, that all parties kind of understand this change, that I think is largely what contributed to this pretty fast, pretty successful implementation of outpatient restoration. Outpatient does include jails, right? And it's in Virginia. When we use that term here in Colorado, we're not including jails. We know that jails is kind of RISE is basically the one example of jail-based restoration here. All right. Oh, this is me. Okay. So the next recommendation from our review, which becomes part of the consent decree, is this idea of a triage approach. All of you are probably familiar with the triage approach, particularly been to the emergency room. If you've gotten injured and you've gone to the emergency room, typically if you go in there with a minor injury, what happens? you usually wait, right? You might go in at noon and you might come home at 11 p.m. And we kind of grumble about medical services, but we kind of know that's what's going to happen if we go in there with a small injury. If, you know, God forbid, you go in there with a life-threatening injury, what happens? You get service really quick, okay? And you know, nobody really complains and says, hey, you know, Neil over there, he's been here for 6 hours for his cut. Why'd you jump in line? Why'd you get ahead of Neil? The answer is no. You had immediate needs, right? You were a higher priority. And we understand that in medicine, we understand that in all sorts of other contexts. The forensic mental health system has not usually operated that way, right? It's operated much like, you know, we say much more like the Department of Motor Vehicles, which people generally don't like going to, right? Because you go in, you take a ticket, you wait for a really long time. And it doesn't really matter if you had to take your driving test and become a driver, or if you just had to turn in this one little form. You're going to be there for hours and hours, just waiting for your place in line. Okay, and that's, again, in America, that's historically been the forensic mental health model. Is this kind of take a number and wait? But we've really kind of argued, and I think this is the more modern shift, that forensic mental health services probably need to operate a little more like an ER, right? That recognizes people come in with very different levels of need. There are absolutely people who need to be in the hospital very, very soon for reasons of safety to themselves or others, for reasons of just humane concerns and morality, right? They need to be in there soon. There's others who do need treatment, but need it less urgently, right? Much like the cut that requires stitches but isn't life-threatening. And so you get these kind of triage decisions that now evaluators need to make. And so, you know, you really have different quadrants here, right? These people have urgent need and need to go inpatient right away. And this is a category that we've labeled Tier 1 here, right? Through the mediation and consent decree, this becomes Tier 1. The people with the highest need who need to go into the hospital very soon. Within 7 days is the time limit. This is a new policy, started June 1. The department seems to be doing this very fast, genuinely getting folks in really fast within those timelines. Of course, there's also people with less urgent needs, right? And the consent decree allows much more time for them to be admitted. Still need them admitted. That still has to happen. There's still deadlines there that have to be met. But there is this triage process. One of the things that's important to understand for the clinicians is their focus, the evaluators, the FST team that we'll talk about later, their focus is really on clinical eligibility, right? Evaluators aren't tasked with, is this person, you know, legally suitable? They're not making the final call about whether they are treated outside. It really is just clinical. And I think, frankly, the evaluators had some struggle understanding that they're not responsible for every other thing out there, right? Just the clinical question. The triage is a clinical question first and foremost. Here too, we have some examples. I'm going to speed through these for the sake of time. Here's some good examples from Virginia, another spot in Virginia. One of the things I do want to mention about this, though, is that this triaging, it can be done very well. It has not been done this wide scale, as wide scale as Colorado is. Maybe in Utah, that might be the closest example. But generally, these programs have been kind of piloted. They've looked really, really good. But Colorado is kind of on the forefront in terms of rolling out this triage in a very broad way. This is an exciting development.
Just going to say a couple of other quick things about triage. And a nod to Dr. Thompson. I know in Louisiana they also have a triage system kind of foisted by consent decree, different timeframes for different people on a clinical eligibility need. But I think Dan is right. And the scale that we've got in Colorado and the plan that we have, I think, is unlike any other, and I think it's going to be very successful. But it is a test. It's an experiment. I think it's got a really high chance of success. There's good data behind these kinds of things in other systems. I think we're going to be able to pull this off well. But I want to say a couple of quick things. I mentioned that evaluators are asked to answer 3 questions: competency or not, or competent or not, if incompetent, inpatient or not, and then as Dan has addressed, this is the 3rd question: if they need to go to the hospital, how quickly? What I think is also critically important to understand that the heart of years of litigation, the pain of all that litigation, I don't want to say all, but a lot of it had to do with these people that are very, very sick in jail, waiting to get to the hospital in the old system, pulled their number. I'm number 130 in line, and I am really, really sick. And I'm going to be sitting in a county jail with sort of a mixed bag of clinical services and supervision for 2 to 3 months. That's a pretty agonizing place to be, right? And that was the case for a small number of people, but a small number is critically important, right? You've got to address the needs of everyone. And that is where things got really tough and contentious. How do we work a system to be able to address those needs, in addition to everyone's needs? But those are the critical. We were afraid these people are really at harm for hurting themselves, hurting somebody else, getting into trouble again. We don't want these things to happen. I've been really, and as Dan mentioned, really pleased with the response of the department on Tier 1. They have stepped up to the plate. They have created capacity at the hospital. They have gotten people in very quickly. If the evaluator says, I think this person is Tier 1 and needs to get in quick, the hospital is getting them in quick. So real kudos to the hospital for being able to, and the department for pulling that off. It's a minority of the cases, right? And so some of the bigger work is going to have to deal with Tier 2. What do we do with all these other folks, and how do we get them in more quickly? That's a slightly different task, but I've been very, very pleased with how the department has responded to Tier 1. What's also important to know is that regardless of whether the person is, by the evaluator, recommended as Tier 1 or Tier 2, they're going to spend some time in jail before they get to the hospital. Tier 1, very brief amount of time. Tier 2, a longer period of time, but there's some period of time in jail. Last year's legislation provides funding for some of those folks to receive enhanced services. The appropriation for SB 223 provides additional funding for people who are in county jails, who are in the competency system to receive enhanced services. Those proposals are going out, being reviewed by Dragruti Shaw and others. And then there's a forensic support team that's been implemented, and they're going through orientation today. Dan and I had the privilege of visiting them yesterday and seeing that orientation in person. Really solid group of people, professionals who are going to be monitoring each person who is in the competency system. So even if evaluator says they're Tier 2 and the person is going to wait in jail for some period of time, days to weeks, that's not the end of the story, right? So Colorado has been thoughtful and responsive about saying, well, we're not going to let them sit there until their number comes up. We're going to have some other people check in on them once a week and make sure that that enhanced jail-based service is really treating their need while they're waiting, so that we can make sure that they're in the right spot. They might decompensate, stop taking meds, and they might move up to Tier 1 while they're waiting to get into the hospital. If so, let's get them in quick. By the same token, some of these Tier 2 people may stabilize and be ready for outpatient restoration. So it's so exciting to be part of a system that's being built that's more nimble and can make more sophisticated decisions instead of the one blunt tool that was always used, take a number and wait for your turn in the hospital. That's the old historical way that we solved this in Colorado. So super exciting to be on the forefront of a new dawn there. Okay, 3 other ways that we are trying to move the system forward. One is using data. Everybody's favorite topic, and it always brings the crowd to a rapt attention when we talk about data. But this is critically important, and there was some holes for CDHS in their data tracking, their data collection, and their data analysis. Some decisions just by the seat of the pants, good intentions, but not a lot of data to drive those decisions. A good functioning forensic mental health system collects accurate data. It has a good data analysis capability, and then it makes recommendations based on those data trends. So we, just listed a few areas where we're pushing the department and have been, again, pleased with their response and pulling things together. What kinds of evaluations are we doing? Are we getting more evaluations from one county or one judge than another? Are we getting a higher hit rate of incompetence opinions from one county for another, for example? Or within the evaluation team itself, is there a wide range of opinions being levied by the evaluation team? Or are they sort of seeing it the same way across evaluators? What kind of bed projections are we going to need in Colorado going forward? How can we reduce the length of stay for people at any of these restoration programs, particularly the inpatient population? I know Dr. Thompson is worked Louisiana into a really nice, sophisticated system to say, we've got 3 classifications of people inpatient at the hospital who are there for inpatient restoration. And we're trying to do something different with those 3 different categories, if you will, of incompetent patients, because they need something different. And by doing that, you can reduce the length of stay in the hospital and create more bed capacity. Financial costs of these different programs that we're partnering with, and as well as the outcomes with these partner programs. Quick example in Hawaii. I like this slide because it shows the beautiful Hanalei Bay, but I also like this slide because I'm proud of the work that we did regarding data in Honolulu. And so my experience there, overseeing the evaluation team, every forensic evaluation, competency evaluation that was done in Honolulu was done through my office, and we suffered from any kind of data whatsoever. So over the course of my tenure there, I was able to start to collect some data on how often our evaluators were finding people competent or incompetent, sane, insane, recommending hospitalization versus community. And it really helped us winnow down on training, on education, on where we were doing things well and where we needed to do things better. What evaluators are kind of missing the boat on a couple of ideas as a department, where we were getting things right and things wrong. And we took that out to some of our other forensic programs, the outpatient restoration program, the jail diversion program. It really helped us become more efficient and effective with those programs. So we have, again, been pleased with the initial response from the department on data. The first reports that we got were pretty thin, and now when we get our monthly compliance report, it's filled with a lot of really, really solid data. So looking forward to continuing that process. I'm going to talk about number 6, which is in our report kind of labeled creating better access to information. Sort of a misnomer. It's part of it, but that's not quite it. But I will say, I had a conversation with an unnamed district attorney, and I was speaking with this district attorney about, why don't you guys stipulate to outpatient restoration more often? And the attorney said, you know, Neil, I would if I knew where they were, or if I knew what happened to them, or why they don't ever come back to court for their next hearing. Like, sometimes they just get lost, and then I don't know how to find them. I don't know what they're doing. I can't, in good conscience, as a DA representing public safety, just release somebody into a system that I can't follow. So fortunately, we have developed 2 things in Colorado: the Bridges program, which has a tracking function for people, but within the department, a forensic support team, which also serves an analogous function from the department's clinical perspective. So not only is the court going to be apprised of housing status and that sort of thing from the Bridges program, but we'll also have updates from the clinical perspective. How's their restoration progress coming? Are they making their appointments to see the psychiatrist? Are they taking their medication? Now, there's going to be some confidentiality and privacy issues we've all got to work through in getting that information to the court in a reasonably efficient way, but that's critical to get buy-in to these programs. If you're going to release somebody to the community, the court has got to be satisfied that they're walking into a system that is strong, solid, and is going to be able to be effectively communicating back and forth. So that's this forensic support team that I mentioned earlier. They have that function for everyone that's in the competency system. They're going to be, or they, yeah, I guess starting next week, will be, they'll have a caseload, right? And that person, that incompetent defendant, that defendant who has been adjudicated incompetent to proceed, is going to be tagged to that forensic navigator, that forensic support team navigator, regardless of where they go. If they're in jail, they got the same person. If they're transferred to the hospital, they got the same person. If they go to the community, they got the same person. If they change housing levels, they got the same person. The court and all the clinical folks know what's going on at all times with these folks who are in the competency system. And that has not existed before. And I think that is another seismic shift for Colorado. It's going to make more capacity and more comfort with an outpatient system than ever before. Similar system in Philadelphia. This is born in my experience in Honolulu, where I was part of that forensic support team, if you will, as a forensic coordinator there. These sorts of pockets around the country that have similar programs, they work, they're very effective, and that's why we're so optimistic about them working in Colorado. Last one.
Sure. Well, and I think we've touched on this enough today already, but one of the recommendations we really pushed, or the caveats or the tone we try to convey, is that there can be such pressure to do things rapidly, you know, and that's understandable and that's appropriate in a way, But in any interventions, right, in any changes, really have to emphasize quality over speed. You can do a D- or a D+ or even a C job pretty quickly, but for long-term justice and care of people who need it, you really do need to take some time to ensure the quality is optimal. And this is one of the challenges going forward. There are a lot of new interventions coming on, the FST, the triage. Many of these are very, very exciting. And frankly, some of them have been, they've been pushed fast by the consent decree. Frankly, faster than is ideal, right? In the sense that there's not ideal lengths of time and lead time to really develop those. The department has been very conscientious about trying to keep quality high, but this will be one of the challenges going forward, in that anything implemented has to sort of maximize quality and not just speed. So again, these are examples of how states have kind of tried to emphasize quality even among speed. And those are the core recommendations we had. Those are many of the things that have made it into the consent decree, and as of today are even operational in many cases. So very, very excited about that. I know you all are thinking more broadly and talking about more and more potential solutions, interventions, changes. And there's many of these to talk about here, and we'll just try to run through them briefly. My understanding is that you have been talking about some of these already. One that I'm very enthused about is this idea of a competency calendar or docket, where competence matters are really sort of centralized in one court or with one judge. This tends to be good for some, I won't go into all the detail, but this tends to be good for very, very many reasons. We had been familiar with some of these, and in sort of doing homework here, have been talking to more and more of them in recent history. And folks are really enthused. The quote we hear is, yeah, I couldn't imagine going back to the old way. Once we really started this and it really launched, I just couldn't imagine going back and trying to have all the competency matters scattered across all the courts with judges that were kind of halfway familiar with it and always looking for the right party to catch it at the right time. These really build in some efficiency. So been enthused about that. Katie, I know has been exploring some of those. Other possibilities, court clinics. Neil, you would feel free to jump in here at any time. We'll just kind of run through them quickly. Specialized court clinics.
Yeah, there's many places around the country, Massachusetts, Ohio, DC, Honolulu, many, many others that have a mental health staff at the court itself to do a quick read on the person who the judge may be considering or the public defender may be considering raising competency. And that helps the court have a more immediate pathway. Sometimes that clinician can say, I know why you thought this might be incompetency, but it's really drugs, or it's really just somebody who's belligerent, and let's hold off on the competency issue. That's sort of a large beast to undergo. Why don't we take our time and see if we can do it a different way? So those court clinics really help give that immediate advice to the court right up front. Do you want to tag team on these? Or?
Sure. Well, I tell you what, let's move. I'm a little concerned about time for questions. So
I agree.
Let's move fast. Assisted outpatient treatment is one. Specialized housing, I mentioned that housing is a challenge. Specialized housing is a very promising option. Bigger statutory changes. The last one I'll mention, I know there's been some interest in competence screenings. I've been told that I think is a mixed bag. I think there's some that I think there are ways in which that could be really positive in the right circumstances. I've also seen situations where that can sort of exacerbate the problem. I've worked with one system where what essentially happens is that becomes well, if there's any doubt, let's bump up to the hospital for them to decide. So in some ways, it actually increases hospitalization, increases some of the things we are trying to not overuse. I have sometimes read those reports and thought, oh, good grief, now that I see the guy here and read this initial report, it's clear if somebody spent another half hour, it would have been very clear this person's competent. So I think a real mixed bag there that again, probably warrants a lot of discussion.
Can you just let the room know what you mean by assisted outpatient treatment?
when we're looking at assisted outpatient treatment, it's sort of a broad catch-all phrase for mandatory outpatient treatment, mandatory psychiatric meds or treatment in the community that's got a court order behind it that says, you know, if you're going to be released, you have to do X, Y, and Z. That's been effective in some places. I know it's a controversial topic and rolls out differently in different jurisdictions that are on board with it. Some of the results are pretty good though, and it is, I think that's probably the most controversial topic to discuss. It just brings in so many other pieces of morality and justice and self-determination, but I think it's important to discuss here. Some places will say, if you're going to go to the outpatient restoration program, you're going to get your injectable before you go, like it or not, and that's sort of a part of the terms and conditions of outpatient treatment. This is probably our last slide here. I just want to throw out some things that haven't worked so that hopefully we can knock them off the table unless there's something that we don't understand. Over-relying on inpatient beds, I think we've made that case. Competency checklists, for all but the most minor of charges, are probably not a good way to go through. We're looking at municipal charges. Sure, a checklist is probably reasonable to consider. When you're looking at heavy-duty charges and a more complex case, or not even heavy-duty charges, more serious charges, misdemeanors and on up, a checklist, the field has really gone away from using a checklist kind of a methodology. Some states have lowered the qualifications of evaluators. Some states now, in fact, an increasing number, I think around 15 to 18 states allow master's level clinicians to do competency evaluations. And I think we have a real caution against going that route too quickly. I certainly don't have, this is not a self-serving comment. I am a doctoral level psychologist and I would meet qualifications to do competency evaluations in 49 out of 50 states. This is not a self-serving comment. But the same arguments were often made by psychiatry a few decades ago when psychology started to make inroads into doing competency evaluations. They don't know what they're doing. They're not qualified to do these things. And they were right. And so psychology has spent several decades getting training, getting infrastructure, building a journal, building a professional organization around forensic psychology, and with a specialization in competency, that now the data is very clear. Status of, the quality of reports, the rates of opinions are equivalent between psychology and psychiatry. Other disciplines and lower levels of professionals don't have that infrastructure yet. It's not to say a social worker couldn't do these or a psychiatric nurse couldn't do these effectively. This is my opinion, but without any data to support their effectiveness, and certainly with no infrastructure that is provided to those different disciplines or lower level of qualifications, just not there yet to be able to come to the table, I believe, in an incredible way. You want to say anything else about that?
No, that's fine. I mean, you know, finally, it's this last one of very fast evaluation deadlines, and that's been mandated by consent decree in some places as well. And there's just kind of caution there on doing these too fast. Generally, once you get down to these 7-day deadlines for evaluations, things like that, you start to have more, I guess, false positives, for lack of a better term. People who are still on substances, who get misopined as incompetent, then get in the hospital system, sort of detox from their substances, come down from their high, and they're fine. But the sense is that too aggressively fast deadlines sort of backfire sometimes, and that's probably not a good rate to go. And in fact, these last ones, you know, you can sort of group these last three together as strategies that say, like, hey, let's just hurry up and do this quick and dirty. Why does this confidence development process have to be so long and complicated and cumbersome? Let's just crank these out fast. And generally, the let's crank these out fast model fails and causes more problems, right? So I think that's kind of a broad way of summarizing some of this.
Open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
There are questions in the room, and I will say I appreciate the positive words about. I know the team's been working really hard on getting this consent decree in place. I think what I challenged this committee is I don't know how much we're going to see the benefit of those good things, given that the faucet is just on and we're getting hit with so much demand that a lot of the good things you see, like say forensic navigators, their caseloads are going to be huge because there's so many people they have to see, where you don't see the maximum benefit of those things that we're putting in place. And we may not. It belongs to faucet keeps flooding us with folks that could otherwise be diverted to other systems and not even come into the competency system. So I feel like, and I think we agreed, we agreed on the consent decree. So, but what you all said is, thank you for your kind words. I think we have a lot to go as well. But at the same time, I think a lot of those benefits are going to be challenging if the faucet is we're getting so many referrals every month that we can't maximize the system. And that's the challenge for me for this room, is to think about who really needs to be in the system and who doesn't. So, but questions for you and Dan?
Just real quickly, Robert. I think there's probably 3 places to intervene. One is the judiciary, one is statutes, and one is clinical services. So with judiciary, I'm talking about attorneys and judges having good education about what really merits a comp eval and what doesn't, having them have more familiarity with what happens when a person is opined incompetent. I know sometimes it's a good defense strategy for competency, but it's not always just competency. Like there may be other mechanisms at play that kind of trigger the comp eval. So helping the judiciary and associated personnel understand what makes for a good comp eval versus not, and that's where data kind of comes in to help. Statutorily, some states have, for example, excluded misdemeanors from competency restoration. I mean, it's on the books in many places. You just don't, it's not an option. I don't know if that really satisfies the needs of the misdemeanor population clinically, but it would certainly cut out from some of the volume. And then the cases are dismissed in some places, and then they're ordered to clinical services.
Outpatient.
Yep. And then lastly, just to finish the thought, and we can bring that comment up, diversion services, pretrial diversion, trying to do as much with CIT and diversion, really these diversion services, to try and get people the clinical need that they deserve and merit, rather than accessing that only through the competency system.
Thanks.
Okay, several questions, and I'm not sure. Rick, was your hand up first? Is it Tim in the back? Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah, I'll get right. Let me take Rick first, and then we'll get Tim.
Follow up on that last point on misdemeanors. Do you know anything? I mean, I'm assuming that has been effective in states that have been willing to drop charges under, I guess, Jackson, as opposed to, I mean, because the constitutional issues are the same, whether it's misdemeanor or felony, right? Do you know any more about that? And have there been any case law challenges to that in any way?
I don't know of any case law challenges to it. I know it is.
Can you speak into the mic so people understand?
Sorry. I don't have any case law challenges to it. I know that that practice is seems to be increasing. And I think, you know, to your point, Allison, I think it obviously works best when there is something else there, right? If competence was the way the person was supposed to intersect with the mental health system, you know, it may not be great to send them right back on the street without any mental health contact. If there's a mechanism to them divert them to outpatient, I think it does make a lot of sense. I think it does address some of these Jackson issues of people who are, you know, getting restored for a very lengthy period of time. I think it makes a lot of sense. The other piece that I suspect you all probably know is that the rates of incompetence are far higher among misdemeanors, right? We've seen this elsewhere in the country. It's in the Virginia data I track. It's in the Colorado data that's now being made available. Thank you. You know, the misdemeanors are just a sicker group, and they are found incompetent at a much higher rate. So to the extent you kind of take them out of the mix, you are disproportionately affecting the volume of competence cases.
I don't want to make the claim, and I'll get you, Tim. I don't want to make the claim that we're advocating to do that. I'm just saying it should probably be something that's kicked around, right? That would be one way to address that volume. Tim?
Hi, thank you. Something you said brought up a question in my mind. In those jurisdictions that do that dismiss the misdemeanor cases, and you spoke about them being ordered into services, what's the legal basis for that? Because I just don't see a legal basis for ordering anybody into services outside of that or a full-blown civil commitment.
Well, you're hitting on an area that I'm not an expert in. So I'm not sure I have a good answer for you. Miami-Dade County is a great example of how they've tried to address this. And if anybody knows the the kind of legality or the mechanisms legally for making that happen, great. If not, I'm happy to try and link with Judge Leifman and figure out how they've figured that out there.
Can I add, before we go down the details of any legal explanation, we should decide as a committee if that's a route we want to go before we get into the workload. So, but if that is a route, then we will do our homework and look into it. I know that Judge Seamus went to Arizona and they talked a lot about the court-ordered outpatient treatment component of their system, which I think I would like this group to discuss at some point also, court-ordered outpatient. I get that it's a civil rights thing and the civil liberties and where you weigh that against someone who's struggling. I mean, and Colorado has a civil commitment bar. It's pretty high, and it's usually almost only used for inpatient. So there are some certs for outpatient, but it's more frequently started at least for inpatient. But I think there were other.
Any other questions, Lucy?
Yes, I have a few. So do we know at this point how many FST navigators are going to be and how they're covering the state, or is that a later conversation?
That is known.
We do.
Yeah.
I think the number's 15. Is that right, Terry? Correct. They've staffed 17 out of the 18 positions from, director to coordinators and all the navigators. All the navigators are in place. And they followed sort of the Bridges, what's the word I'm looking for? Workforce plan. Denver has multiple navigators where some rural counties have been consolidated into just one navigator covering a few counties, based largely on the Bridges plan combined with the number of cases referred from the different counties that the department has been able to track. So really trying to say, we get this many competency cases in Arapahoe County, let's go ahead and put one person there.
Okay. And I get
Just to follow up to that, because I had that question down too. Is that on the website somewhere, like who they are or what the regions are? Probably not yet. Not yet? That'd be awesome.
When will it be on the website?
What's that?
When will it be on the website?
I really don't know. Right now, we're just focused on getting them up and out and about and set up.
Okay. Different topic. I was, for the evaluations, in Senate Bill 223, the evaluations regarding the clinical level of care, is that being included in evaluations right now, or is that being deferred till later dates?
It's happening now.
Okay.
And that's one of those things that Dan was discussing, quality versus time.
Yeah.
Sometimes the evaluators have been put in a tough position to make opinions on things that aren't in existence yet. They make an opinion on outpatient restoration, but the forensic support, they've been doing that since June. But the outpatient team hasn't been, the forensic support team is just now going to start next week. So some of these things sequentially just doesn't map up, but they are asked to make those opinions, yes.
And I'm not being critical.
Sure.
We're communicating with 800 public defenders in the state, and so trying to let them know what to look for and what the timelines are and things helps them anticipate those things. So, and then regarding the concept of outpatient being the default, I'm curious where we're at in terms of judicial training. I know our statute isn't as strong as the one that was up there, was at Virginia. But in terms of judicial training about the importance of looking at these through the lens of that being the default, do we have any sense where we are on that issue?
Yeah, that's an issue we ask every week to some department, and I think, Robert, are you comfortable giving an update on that?
I can address
To a
that.
certain degree, I mean, there's also, Senate Bill 223 also requires the state court administrator's office to educate as well as the state public defender and the DA. So we do some of the training. I don't know where we're at as far as
I think
how
Judge
many.
Seamus just typed in.
Yeah, the Supreme Court just approved a permanent standing committee on judicial education and mental health at the end of July. I'm also doing a presentation on a lot of these issues at Judicial Conference next month. The objective of that training, in part, is to come up with a list of topics that the bench itself feels that they need information and education about. But there is an awful lot happening. We're also collaborating with a number of other states that have just also created judicial education mental health committees on Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon as well. And so that's something which is just being created now. And so if there's any way of getting better direction so we can do a better job of conveying that information to the bench, it's the perfect time.
Yeah, Lucy, you've hit on an issue that we are that we've continued to bring to the attention of the department, and they're probably sick of hearing it, but it is this issue of got to get the word out. We want to make sure that people know what's going on because it's really critical to get that done. And you know, there's only so many hours in the day, you know, so many people that can do it. I get that, but that is one of those things that we are eager to see moving forward soon. Is trying to get the word out to everybody that says, because you want misinformation to go out, right? You want to say, this is what the FST does, this is what the triage does, this is what evaluators are now asked to do, and that's critically important.
There's this real marketing component to all of this, right? Just kind of rolling these things out as uniformly as possible so that everybody knows. Deeply challenging. I don't mean to make light of it. It's a hard task, but yeah, you're spot on. That's crucial.
I had one more question, but I don't want to dominate, so.
Well, maybe we can give Ben a chance. He's poised.
No, I have a question, so I appreciate that. You're going very
All right. Well, then this is the last one. For the folks that have been in custody and stabilized, right? That was the word that you all used, and that may be sort of better for outpatient restoration. I'm wondering, is there a plan for those folks who are stabilized, waiting, and have found themselves being now competent? Because we do see that. We see folks who without restoration treatment have made themselves competent through support of their lawyers or our social workers or things like that. And so is there a way to get those folks reevaluated quickly rather than waiting for them to begin restoration and 3 months later finding them now competent when we knew it months in advance?
Good question. I think FST is the short answer to that.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. The FST is going to be monitoring competency progress. That's part of the consent decree. And the mechanism for getting an evaluation back to the court, I don't think we have drilled down on the details yet. I think that's one of the clear advantages of having a competency docket or a competency court meets once a week, and you can get those people right back in quickly.
I'd be clear though, I mean, we're talking pre-restoration determination. So I imagine a public defender has to ask the court for an expedited court hearing, right? I mean, I can't, because the forensic navigators are working with those that determined incompetent and need to be restored, and your question sounds like it's before that. Like they're waiting in jail.
After been found incompetent.
Okay.
And are presenting now competent, a way to get them quickly evaluated.
So yes, the forensic navigators are supposed to be, we're working on sort of what the forensic navigator and the Bridges program liaison are supposed to coordinate that communication between the two. They're sort of working on a document or a protocol on what that looks like. So those are the two groups that are supposed to connect to each other about how somebody's doing.
I think it's an important piece that we just haven't drilled down on yet. LA County, for example, Office of Diversion and Reentry, they call these off-ramps, just exactly what you're describing. Let's off-ramp this person. The team goes in and sees them, and then they make a quick report back to the court. But obviously the defense counsel has got to agree that this is okay to do. So there's probably some more work that would need to be done to get that operationalized, but I think it's a really important piece.
And there will be some, that absolutely will be some version.
Right.
They're doing better. There has to be a way for the FRT to raise the flag to the right people, which probably does include defense counsel here, who can say, yeah, we love another evaluation right away, let's try that fast. And again, this is kind of an indirect commercial for competence dockets as well. They tend to have some leads there that make that kind of thing go much faster and get addressed much sooner.
Ben?
And then after Ben, we're going to go to Judge Seamus on the phone. I'm just going to put that out there so he gets a chance to pipe in.
So I have 4 topics. Particularly around like the quality of assurance, I think there's an area of opportunity for us in that realm. I know DHS has been working hard to get that workforce up and going. We saw a presentation 2 weeks ago or a month ago. I was just wondering, what are kind of some national, when it comes to the quality of evaluations across the country, what are some typical standards that you've seen? And then to DHS, have you guys thought about implementing those standards, or where are you? Or are you just at the point of kind of building this workforce?
Are you asking about, I just want to make clear, evaluations or the forensic services themselves?
The evaluations.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. That's a and again, I'll sound self-referential here in terms of talking about Virginia was the first state to do this 30 years ago as evaluation started to move towards outpatient. Developed a training program, a kind of university collaboration with the state for training that has been kind of replicated in lots of states. Massachusetts goes even further and certifies evaluators. Several models like this now. Some had then even developed into sort of oversight programs where all evaluations that are court-ordered are actually reviewed for a quality control check. That sounds really cumbersome. It actually was a lot cheaper to start that position than to pay for a few bad NGRI hospitalizations. So even that kind of quality assurance is moving forward. Colorado is frankly, I think Colorado's ahead of some states on that, and I think there are quality measures that could go further.
One quick addition there. SB 223 does mandate that the department collaborates with academic institution to do some of that. So that has not yet happened. It's down the road, timeline-wise, but I think that's probably something that
must
likely
happen.
Will help fill that role.
Judge Seamus, do you want to pipe in and unmute to ask your question?
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I listened to the plan and the presentation, and it sounds exciting. It makes perfect sense to me. And then I just contrast that with even just my week this week. And I think of the kinds of cases that in reality come before me. And my fear is that even with the best of plans, I'm not sure whether we're going to get the impact that we're intending to. And I can think of 3 examples, as I said this week. An individual where we asked for an outpatient evaluation. The defendant missed his appointment. He claimed it was because of his bicycle. Collaterally, probation comes in because he's on probation on a previous matter and says that he's threatening to use, he knows where he can get a gun, threatening to use it. He stopped taking his medications and also is using other substances. And so I have no choice but to take him into custody. We have no jail. He gets sent to Park County where they have absolutely no mental health services. So he's not going to get his evaluation then. He's going to have to be brought back here. He's probably suffering anyway. And so even though we have all of these protocols in place, if we don't figure out how to make sure that they're implemented and there's accountability, that they are in fact getting implemented and implemented properly, then we may not be able to accomplish what our ultimate goal is. A second example is a woman who had competency issues. She was able to be successfully restored. The original charge was because when she was struggling, she during the process of an arrest, bit an officer, so she's charged with a class 4 second-degree felony, but she still cycles even though she's technically competent. And so she goes about 6 weeks with doing well, and then she stumbles, and she's been in the system probably for the last 15 years, and now she's run out of options, and on that original charge, because technically she's competent, she has no alternatives but to be sent to the Department of Corrections. And so I'm not quite sure, even if we fix the problems with competency, whether we're actually getting to the roots of the problems we're trying to address. And then the other part, even just today, I had a woman before me who was hallucinating at the bench. We passed the case. I asked for a paramedic to be called, but instead the sheriff's just sent her home. And so to me, those are 3 very different kinds of issues. But I listened to this program and it sounds great, but I can't help but wonder in practicality, how is that going to change the lives of those 3 individuals?
So we agree. Yeah, so, I mean, I struggle to provide a more of a response than that. I think you're absolutely correct that there are individuals for whom the plan that's described here, even when implemented well, is not going to fix the broad challenge of psychiatric illness in the criminal justice system. I mean, I think there are just inevitably gaps there. I imagine a process where, as this community goes on, they continue to work on those gaps and try to chip away at each problem. But I don't know of a better answer Your Honor. I wish I could say there was a clear solution for each of those people that we hadn't yet mentioned. I think those are fine illustrations.
The illustrations are helpful, and one of the things that we do as part of the consent decree process is meet once a month with DLC and the department and AGs and monitor progress and implementation and those sorts of things. But one thing we've tried to do each month is take an illustration in a case and figure out what went wrong and what can we do differently to make sure that this is working correctly. And so those illustrations, as tragic and difficult to unpack as they are, I think will help us move the system forward in small ways. I agree with Dan, though. I'm not sure how else to respond at this point.
And I guess my hope is that in addition to the other recommendations, that part of this is to implement an ongoing dialogue, which I think the bench has been generally absent from, to do exactly what you're saying and to try to troubleshoot those problem cases in the system, and possibly on some level to make it required in all districts. Because quite frankly, in our district, until I raised it a couple of weeks ago, our sheriff was not aware whether or not any inmate was getting any mental health services at all. It turned out they were not. And that's just simply unacceptable. But if we're not having that conversation, no one will even know about the problem. No one will be able to solve it. Conversely, if part of what the recommendations are require those kinds of conversations, at least we have a better shot at addressing some of these issues.
Yeah, agreed. No, that's crucial. Neil mentioned the conversations we have monthly between the department and DLC and us, and we do invite you all to submit cases to that. I mean, these are kind of trouble, challenge cases we talk through. But again, even this is just one component of the system, right? And many of you represent other pieces of the system, and the conversations have to take place in those parts of the system as well, right? Court, law enforcement, places that are well beyond our slice of the system.
This is Ben. I totally agree with Judge Seamus on this. Two possible suggestions for the plan is, one, I think there's a space to be more explicit about some just performance metrics for this whole work. The first thing that comes to my mind are we actually tracking on the breakdown between inpatient and community-based restorations, and is that changing over time? And so we have a very transparent, yeah, the shift is going, or it's been stagnating. Why is that the case? The other thing that I would say to maybe more explicitly to Judge Seamus's point is, so I come from Medicaid managed care, and part of that system is built in within it. We have to have a grievance policy, and there are pretty strict federal rules around that. I would maybe even suggest adding something like that in here in the first kind of implementation phase. So it's not just that, hey, we're emailing Robert, can you take this to your monthly meetings? But there's a designated space for pockets around the state to call in or to report, there's a breakdown that's happening. Can you funnel this to a space where it can constructively be solved and you're tracking trends qualitatively that way? It's a bureaucratic process, but it's still an assurance to a lot of people that their voice has to be monitored. So just two thoughts around making sure this is actually being implemented.
Quick answer on the first one. Some of those metrics are and must be reported. Consent decree establishes the goal of a 10% increase in community-based restoration by December 2019. So department does report that, tracks it each month. June it was 27%, July was 28%. This month it was around 30, approaching, backed up to about 33%. That's about the goal for December 2019. So that has been trending in the right direction, but you're absolutely right, that must be monitored. The grievance procedure, I think, is really worth talking through. Robert, did you have more to say?
Yeah, I guess I would like to know more where the concern is that there needs to be more quality control. Is there a concern at the quality? I mean, we've talked about the quality evals by addressing it through standardizing the training, making sure there's a curriculum, trying to get a sense of where the concern about quality is coming from. So one, that we can address it, but I'd also want to make sure if we're fixing a problem that we know what problem we're fixing.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. I think in the system that we have both quality, like active quality oversight controls that can do quality reviews, but we acknowledge that there can be a breakdown at any point. And so when that occurs, someone can solicit a grievance that then goes back into, well, what's happening? So I guess it's just more about, can we set up those structures in place so you're capturing it both in an immediate sense and then a proactive sense?
But a grievance of what? Because there is a process for a second eval. If you don't like, if either party's not happy with the first eval.
I think the grievance is what Judge Seamus's examples are, where, you know, it sounds great on paper, but in his experience, he's not getting those services. And so he could, instead of bringing it to this meeting, he could call a hotline or submit a report that then goes up to say, hey, all of this well-executed thing just didn't happen, period. Can you guys talk about that?
So Ben, can I ask a question? They have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. I want to make sure Carly gets her question asked. And this is certainly something we can come back to as a subcommittee after the break, but just if it's pertinent to the special masters team being here, I think I want to make sure that Carly's question is heard. Yeah.
One of your recommendations was specialized housing or residential programs. And from my position in the community, I think that that's where I noticed a big gap in Denver. And one way that we could definitely shore up some of the revolving door that we have with people being arrested and competency raised multiple times, even in a given year. Do you have any good examples of specialized housing programs in other states that maybe we could look at?
Well, it's a great question. Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head, except to say, because I'm not a housing expert, except to say that a continuum is what you need. So specialized housing for people with certain kinds of offenses, sex offenses, for example, sexual offenses, or clinical needs like ID, DD. Like sometimes those specific housing programs will, if not available to people, wait in the hospital because there's nowhere else to go. Right. So those are the two that most often come to mind. I know that we are in talks with California to kind of review their housing array for forensic population, and I think we may have more information specific, to give. But I'm not a housing person, so I think what's most important is just making sure that Colorado knows who the people are hard to place. Maybe it's geriatric, and what kinds of funding and resources are needed for those subpopulations.
Okay, thank you.
And can I say Washington is working on that as a result of their consent decree too, and so they are developing some specialized housing. And can I ask one question of the special masters that hasn't been brought up? Where do you see the role, if any, of peer supports in this?
Actually, our plan and our responses so far has not been particularly attuned to peer specialists, peer support. I think it's critical, and I sort of embarrassed to have had that be an oversight in our work, some of our work. It was such a critical part of our work in Honolulu, for example, and it's just a lived part of my professional life, always being informed by peer specialists, peer support, that I think it's absolutely critical. Do you have anything else?
No, other than to say, again, a modern approach absolutely integrates this, and I think we are probably guilty of just sort of, assuming this is part of it, as opposed to explicitly reminding that this must be a part. Yeah.
Maybe one last question, Rick.
I want to get back to the quality, so if you guys could elaborate a little bit for us, because I think these are good questions. Robert made the point, if it's not broken, why fix it? But the issue of quality is something that, we've struggled with for many, many years. When we revised the statute, we've clearly set standards for the trainers, right? We also built in some continuing medical education continuing education for the providers. And if you remember historically, just to help other people, 10 years ago, we really faced this question of, do we want to have a state certification process on top of those qualifications? The state had its reasons for not wanting to get into the business of certifying evaluators. So my first question is, can you comment a little bit about the Massachusetts, Virginia systems where there is a certification process, number one? Number two, what kind of ongoing continuing education ought to be going on at the level of evaluators? And then I guess thirdly, sort of really out of the box. John's right here. We were talking this morning about the Louisiana system. Hawaii used to have 3 evaluators. Louisiana has a sanity commission where they have 2 evaluators. I was wondering if you want to get to the question, is there something to be broken? How many second opinions have been going on in the state over the last 10 years? Have we had an escalation of second opinion requests from the public defender office? And how many of tested in the court? And again, I know it's data we don't have, but I mean, those are 2 things I think about in terms of trying to see whether there's skepticism out there about the quality of the reports that are coming forward. I can tell you anecdotally, doing this for 18 years, that, you know, whether you're talking to the DAs or you're talking to the public defenders, there's skepticism. It's like, why did that person be found competent or incompetent, depending on which side you're talking about? And then, of course, that leads to the question of justifying to the court another opinion, a second opinion. So I know it's a bunch of joined ideas and concepts, but I'd love to hear you respond to some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in reverse order, I can put.
I've got trouble with this mic. I guess to go in reverse order, I can say we actually don't have data on the second opinions. I don't know if the PD's office might, but we, other than anecdotally and other than knowing that those happen, we have not had a way of tracking or knowing those. Anybody in the room have data or input on that? Okay. A lot of head shakes, so no there. That would be good to know. Certainly a increase in those might be telling, right? In terms of what are other places doing with certification, oversight, training, it really is a mix. So, you know, Virginia and Massachusetts are the 2 most stringent. We administer a 1-week training that is required of anyone who is going to do a court-ordered evaluation of competence and sanity. For other types of evaluations, there are then other trainings, but it's the 1 week to kind of start the process and become eligible to do competence and sanity. That then has an oversight program where all evaluations that are court-ordered must be submitted to the department for review. That oversight piece, I think is interesting because states have had a lot of training that has increased. Oversight is a relatively new endeavor, and at least in our state, it looks like, yeah, this was probably worthwhile. Even if the quality is pretty good, there's a few outliers that, boy, it is nice to identify. So that's my quickest answer on that. Massachusetts does what they describe as a formal certification or designation, a designated forensic psychologist or psychiatrist. Theirs also has an initial training, and it sort of has a mentoring period where the person is initially submitting sample reports, and then they are able to operate independently. You know, I'm not sure why these don't exist in all states. You know, Florida has a shorter one. Other states have some, but they're not universal. We definitely see a correspondence between training requirements and quality. That's undoubted. I don't know if there's a cost issue. They're just not that expensive, frankly. I mean, our contract is not particularly lucrative. They're just not that expensive, and I suspect they're easily paid for by the savings of bad calls. There's also a human cost to bad calls. So yeah, I mean, my bias is to like training, to like continuing education, which is also, again, states vary. Some will have, well, you need 1 session a year of continuing ed. Others will have a lot up front and then maybe less requirements for continuing. You probably want some blend because people do drift over the years. Does that answer, Rick? Is that responsive? Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm standing to signal that we have to say goodbye. And thank this team for their time that they spent with the subcommittee. Neil has offered that I can share email addresses so you can contact them with further questions, and I'm sure that other things will come up. So we'll make sure that you get those after this meeting today.
And I'll stay around. Neil's got a much more exciting life and is off to catch an international flight. I'm happy to stay around. I'm eager to kind of eavesdrop on what's going on, so I'll be around.
Well, and maybe it's just a good time to move. I know we're not exactly following the agenda. We're a little loose, but we can move to a 10-minute break, and you can ask questions. And go ahead, Robert. Yeah. Good call. So we'll reconvene in about 1:10. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just saying, Rachel.
Oh. Thank you. I saw someone just give Robert the high sign. All right, Robert and Allison, I'm going to get everybody started again. I know you can hear me. All right, before we move on into further discussion, we're going to take some time in a few minutes to debrief a little bit about this conversation and presentation from the Special Masters team this morning. Before we do that, so we're going a little rogue, we're going a little off script with the agenda, but we want to make sure that we save time and give time for public comment and questions. So for members of the public who have taken the time to be here today, we appreciate it and want to turn it to you for any questions or comments you may have, either in regards to what you've heard or maybe what brought you today to the meeting. So I'm kind of gazing towards the back.
Well, since I already spoke once, I might as well introduce myself for the records in this. My name is Tim Lane. I'm with the Colorado District Attorney's Council. CDAC represents all 22 elected DAs throughout the state. I've been involved on a number of subcommittees and task forces. In fact, this is probably the only one I'm not sitting at that table. I'm sitting back here. So that's my role and my involvement in here. As far as comments and questions, I think I have a number of comments regarding some of these third intercept number 3 that's going to be discussed, so I'll kind of hold off for now.
Are we going down the line?
You don't have, if you don't want to go down the line, you don't have to. We just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share any thoughts or questions.
I'm Katie Donahue. I'm an assistant city attorney with Denver. I do mental health certifications and involuntary medications for the county of Denver, and I work a lot in this area of the law. So.
My name is Dorinda Robinson. I am the program coordinator for outpatient restoration, and I'm just trying to see what else is going on.
Going no. Well, please feel comfortable having some lunch. We have plenty of food for everybody who's here, so I'll just reiterate that. So we had planned to spend the second component of the meeting today to really revisit some of the work that we started with Intercept 3. But before we did that, I kind of huddled a little with Robert and Summer and Allison. I'm sorry we missed you before we reconvened, and thought maybe it would be useful to spend some time debriefing a little bit around the Special Masters presentation and make sure that we're feeling as a subcommittee like everything's been aired or questions have been asked. And we have time to do that for certain. So we just kind of want to pass it. And maybe Robert can frame a little to help us think through if there's next steps that we need to consider.
Yeah, I think we should start with, is there anything that was mentioned that was like, oh, we really need to revisit this topic in more depth? I know we've gone back and forth, well, not gone back and forth. I know it's been mentioned here and there kind of quietly about the assisted treatment option. Maybe just a show of hands, who's interested in about the court-ordered mandated outpatient treatment concept in a more in-depth meeting in the future? I know I am.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a big chunk of hands, so we'll add that to an agenda for a future sort of conversation. I think we're going to do a lot of homework around it first, but we'll definitely. Oh, Judge Seamus raised his hand, and he probably will need him in that conversation as he's been great. As he's been involved in some of the trainings in Arizona. So we'll definitely add that agenda. Are there other things that was discussed today that you really are hoping that they go more in depth? So I'll tell you, our agenda right now is set based on the intercepts, but there are a couple things that are mentioned that don't necessarily fit into any specific intercept that you may be interested in wanting to hear more about, like a court-ordered outpatient treatment. We'll give you a copy one.
I just want to explore a little bit more the concept of sort of the quick, fast evaluation. I'm starting from a place of high skepticism, and yet I recognize that if our lawyers, and it may be a public defender function, right, because since we initiate so many of these evaluations, if our lawyers had the capacity to access mental health professionals in a quick spot to help us make the decision about whether we felt like we had to raise competency, that might help us inform those decisions. And this is always a challenge for us, and so I think but maybe that's a separate conversation just between our agencies.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's part of, and maybe under-resourced and not clearly laid out enough, was part of some of the feelings around the Bridges liaison. But I think there was a lot on their plate already, and maybe that's not a function they can take on. I'm not sure, but I know that was sort of a vision of having a Bridges liaison, is having mental health people in the courts who the judge can consult with. Because that would be sort of independent of sort of the evaluator or the department. I know, at least I know the conversations I had 2 years ago about the Bridges liaison program creation was there was a hope that would happen. I just don't know if it's resourced well enough to be able to do that. So.
Actually, Salt Lake City has something like that. It has a social worker embedded with the public defender's office that kind of helps with this kind of work a little bit more. And I just wanted to add that I wanted to talk about the assisted outpatient treatment as part of Intercept 3, so it's good that we have it as a separate conversation.
I have a question for Dan. Knowing that we underutilize outpatient restoration, and the department can influence, right, by making sure there's available services, and we're still working on that. We're doing a pilot with Denver where pretrial services is playing a key role in sort of some of the things that even Judge Seamus brought up about monitoring and keeping an eye on these individuals when they're in a community. Are there other things you can think of that really, whether it's legislation, it's outside the department, because this committee has that sort of, that scope to make recommendations that are more than just the department. So other things you can think of that really would promote outpatient services versus inpatient services when inpatient services are not needed?
Yeah, so I think, my knee-jerk answer to that question is much like what you just described, is the kind of monitoring services that make the court feel comfortable with it. Sort of back to Neil's illustration about the DA, very understandably saying, yeah, it's fine in principle, but if I can't be assured that somebody has eyes on this person, I just can't do that. I mean, that's a really reasonable concern. So to the extent you have this, this kind of supervision, these eyes, part of that should be FST, part of it is the kind of situation you're describing in the pilot. I think those are probably the most powerful things, and that's, I mentioned the word marketing, but that is part of marketing, right? It's not just kind of selling the idea conceptually, it's demonstration with, hey, look, here's how it's working. And I don't know, maybe we didn't say this well, but typically outpatient restoration in almost everywhere I'm familiar with has started with small pilots and started with maybe the safest, sort of stacking the deck for success, and the safest, most conservative kind of pilot test. And then as that works, you kind of expand it a little and you expand it a little. So when I talked about Virginia's rollout statewide, that's true, that happened, but there were little pilot programs beforehand that left people thinking, okay, this really can work. I don't think you could go from 0 to statewide rollout. So that kind of demonstration is crucial.
And for the group, if you don't know, pretrial services are not required in every judicial district. Some judicial districts have them, some don't. Most don't have a mental health specialist on their pretrial team. Well, Denver will because we're funding it. I think Arapahoe does. There might be others, I just don't know.
Okay, question from.
I'm from Louisiana, so I don't, obviously know a ton about Colorado, but I've learned a lot in the last couple of days. One of the things that we found is that when we implemented outpatient competency restoration in our more difficult areas, that we really could only get about 10% restored in outpatient because of what the judge was talking about. They don't show up. You have, you know, and if you don't have really good wraparound services, assertive community treatment, forensic assertive community treatment, and the kinds of things that keep them in a good court clinic, that it's rough to keep folks in outpatient. That would be number one. And so I would caution that if you do the pilot and you do it in the right way with the right population, you can get up to those numbers. But if you have a difficult population, your non-misdemeanor population, or people who are really seriously mentally ill and just don't want treatment, that will be real difficult to do on an outpatient basis. Number two, I didn't hear who's holding the inpatient facility accountable for their length of stay, how they go about doing assessments, why do they have gaps in their time frames for restoring people, so that when you're utilizing your beds to the most efficient way you can. And are you guys going to hold them accountable with their data to say, when you're running the inpatient facility, you know, we have to have folks restored within 135 days plus or minus 10. Why is that not happening? If it doesn't happen, what kind of services do you need on the inpatient side, if that's, you know, because those are obviously funded at a certain level. And I was just wondering what your plans are for that piece.
Well, the length of stay has been an internal, at least an internal pressure, mainly because we recognize that there are people on a wait list, and the best way to get them off the wait list is not to have people longer in beds than they need to be. So that's been the pressure, at least for us internally. Internally, we do track it every week. We're tracking length of stay, and every month, because it is one of our primary goals. It's also one of what we call using a 4 disciplines of execution model of a priority, a wildly important goal, it's called. It's that length of stay is one of our wildly important goals as a department. Right now, we were typically around 160. Last month, it was 190 was the average length of stay. We'd like to be closer to where you were at. You mentioned this morning at 120. That's our goal, is the average length of stay being 120. So we're trying different things, including not moving patients as much within the hospital in different units. And then when patients are, one thing we've not done well, and that we are hiring a position that their sole job is to identify folks during team treatment meetings saying, hey, that person seems like they're doing pretty well. Maybe we should not wait to the next court date and ask for an expedited court date. So we are hiring that FTE right now as a full-time sole function, as we call it, fast track, sole function of raising the flag and saying, hey, we need an evaluator to get here. So we are measuring how many referrals we ask for fast track. We are also measuring how many of those referrals are completed within 5 days. So how many of those new evals from the evaluator is completed within 5 days, so we can get it to the court and not wait for the next, in Colorado it's every 90 days. So not waiting for the next 90-day court date to make an opinion. So those are some of the things we're doing. Yeah, there's no official, I think externally, at least in this population, in NGRI, it's an ongoing conversation we're having right now. We're in the process of reviewing cases. But for the competency, 223 does have statute based on your charge level, how long you can be in the hospital. But those are pretty lenient. They're well past 160 days. So it's more of in short, it's something we recognize as we need to fix, and we were putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to get it fixed.
And I'm also interested, and hope this group can opine on this, also getting people out who are not going to become competent, and getting the identification of this person has IDD or this person has another issue that they're not going to change with education, and making sure that we have a out for them.
Can I ask real quick elaboration on that? Because I think while Dan's here and Dr. Thompson, you're here, two things. One, I know you mentioned this morning, we had breakfast, so it wasn't like you mentioned it here and everybody else missed it, but that you do not do competency on misdemeanors in Louisiana. And can you talk a little bit about that, what that looks like? Sure. And the second is thoughts about people who or recurring PITP, recurrent permanent incompetent to proceed, whether they have an official diagnosis of intellectual developmental disability and they're functioning on a lower IQ level, what maybe other states do to stop that, just because they're just doing a process at that point. So
yeah, I would say, the legislatively, you know, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, we decided that the misdemeanors would be handled by, you know, mental health courts and with assertive community treatment models. And so with that, the good side is that it encourages people to participate in their mental health care, and the judges can help them to participate in their mental health care. The problem, as mentioned earlier, is that there's not a lot of teeth in it. And so, you know, if you have someone that's on a misdemeanor charge and then the charge is dropped, then, you know, there's difficulty keeping them in and hooking them in and allowing them to participate in mental health services. And part of that difficulty is just, you know, in the United States, we believe that people, you know, can sort of die with their rights on if they want to. They don't necessarily have to take medication if they don't want to take medication, and we don't use a lot of long-acting medications in the country. I mean, in Europe, we've got 70% of the people with, you know, a diagnosable serious mental illness are on long-acting medications, and we just don't push that. So we're always trying to encourage, you know, take your medications, go to your treatment, do the things that you know make you better, but that requires insight. And so it's difficult, but our system did it primarily because it was occupying a large percentage of the inpatient beds, and we really didn't feel like the inpatient beds were being utilized appropriately to do it. And it's helped us out in lots of ways, but I still have judges calling me with the same thing that the judge was discussing today, and that, you know, I'm trying to get someone in, but I can't get them in. And, you know, the sheriff can't provide services in that parish because they don't have enough money to provide services. So we have services in some places and not services in other places. So I think it's, you know, it's a half a dozen to one, six to the other. You know, you in this forensic system, if you push on one in one area, it's going to pop out somewhere else. Fuller Torrey's written about this for years and years and years, that as you push one system, as Olmsted pushes a system of outpatient care, you push people in the criminal justice system, either into jails, or you push them into the forensic system. But everybody, you know, as a group, everybody needs to take responsibility for this. And I keep telling the sheriffs, you guys have to take responsibility for your piece. We have to take responsibility for our piece. Department of Mental Health has to take responsibility for their piece. But if we all have to take responsibility for it if we're going to actually tackle the problem in globo, you know. But if you keep grabbing one piece and saying that's not my piece, I'm not dealing with it, it becomes a problem. So we've tried to use our system to pull all those different pieces together, the stakeholders together, and say, you know, can you share this piece? You know, we'll provide a district forensic coordinator to you to help you with your mental health issues in your jail. You know, if you identify the guys that are mentally ill that need to move out, and we can figure out ways to do that. You know, so you're using everybody's little piece of the pie to try and improve it. But the misdemeanor problem is going to be difficult if you're trying to restore misdemeanors, or it's going to be difficult for your system to keep up with the number of beds if you're trying to restore every misdemeanor in an inpatient setting without, you know, some kind of triage or stratification and saying, you know, these people probably need inpatient, these people could function with some kind of, you know, sort of hybrid model, and these folks could do outpatient. The other thing is that we, you know, it's not necessarily helpful in competency, but on our back end with our NGBRIs, group homes and places where they can go and housing opportunities, you know, dump out the bed so you can have more room for people to go in and do competency. We talked a little bit about that this morning. And your second question, I missed it or went over my head. Yeah, we have tons of problems with that in our system because there are many states that have you're intellectually disabled, you do not pass go and collect your $200, you're diverted into a system that just takes care of developmentally disabled. In Louisiana, we've had a big problem with all of those facilities with recent lawsuits have been closed down, and there's not opportunities for us to divert people anymore into inpatient facilities when and so they end up sprinkled throughout the system, and we end up with a specific unit that we take care of folks in the forensic hospital that have developmental disabilities. But it's a difficult population because you have a higher rate of people that have sex offenses in that group. They don't respond to typical sex offender treatment. They don't respond to typical psychiatric drug intervention with their violent behavior, because it's not violent behavior that you can predict. They might go a week and not hit somebody, and then they hit somebody 5 times in the next 5 days, you know, and they can be really aggressive with staff. So I would say it's a problem that's challenged almost all states to try and find a way to fix it. And I don't know that there's an optimal state model for that. I mean, Virginia may have a great model for it, but I don't know that there is.
Yeah, so to track, I can't improve on the misdemeanor answer, other than to maybe point out some other examples. So literally was just hearing an example in Utah and now applied in Colorado at the municipal level. And so maybe can I put you on the spot in a moment? I'll give you like a minute to think about it, right? And then you'll be on the spot to respond to Robert's question. This is like me passing the hot potato. The second question about the ITPs, let me start a step back with Allison's question about what about these people who are likely to be permanently ITP. One thing I think maybe could be a little stronger in the current arrangements is that, you know, evaluators, they give that kind of prognosis at the end that's, you know, it's a prognosis that's strictly clinical. It's not really about restoration. Other places will go further and say, hey, evaluators, go ahead and opine on the potential for restoration, right? And you could do it in sort of a veiled way where you say, well, this person's condition's pretty fixed, it's not going to change. I think it'd be fine to let that be more assertive, and for evaluators to say, look, this person's IQ is not going to change, their TBI from years ago is not going to be undone. This is somebody who I do not think will ever be restored to competence, period. I think that's fine to say. You will still have judges who say, well, we're going to try it anyway. And I've just had some ridiculous cases where somebody's repeatedly found, you know, evaluator says there is no chance here, and the judge is just so reluctant. But I think those can become maybe more the exception than the rule. There can probably be a little bit of a culture change, you know, where evaluators, for the most part, are going to be saying this person could be restored, right? I mean, the vast majority of defendants can be restored, but there are certain subsets, particularly ID, TBI, that are far less likely. So I think maybe allowing a little more room for the evaluators to be more assertive about that. That also helps PDs and folks kind of go in and say, look, can we not, you know, can we kind of not waste everybody's time and system resources trying this over and over? So that's maybe an earlier stage intervention. The latter, I don't know of good system interventions. Our state is very similar in that many of the institutions for folks with ID have been shut down. So there is not that kind of easy handoff to those institutions. I have more often seen that kind of PITP situation solved sort of informally, where a judge is willing to drop charges if those involved can sort of show, look, we're not just cutting them loose completely, there's something else out there, there's some support or some service. But that's a very kind of case-by-case solution versus a big blanket policy. And then, yeah, but you want to talk a little bit about?
I came from Utah, where I was housed in the public defender's office. And in Utah, as you previously mentioned, Dr. Rai, each attorney was assigned a social service mitigator. So there were 6 in that particular office, which assisted with competency kind of screenings, but also mitigation for other behavioral health issues. So if I had a client who I thought, you know, something was going on, whether it was mental health or substance use, I could ask my social service mitigator or my substance use coordinator to come and talk with that client. So on misdemeanor cases, with those attorneys, we would often go and coach them through how to work with that individual. We might do a screen, knowing that the consequence of, in Utah, is a class A, B, or C misdemeanor, so M1, 2, 3 here, wasn't enough time to restore that individual. It would be very rare that if we did the competency screening and the person was likely not competent, that we would recommend that they raise formal competency. And then what would happen as a social service mitigator, we were able to do biopsychosocial assessments and we had the public defender in Salt Lake is the largest medical record holder and mental health, behavioral health record holder in the state. So by viewing those, we were able to see how do you connect these individuals to services that can likely help them not return into the system. So if we were recommending not to file formal competency, we weren't just saying, okay, we're going to let this person go. We were able to see, hey, you know what, Lynn was able to be at a higher functioning level when she was on these medications 3 years ago, or this is a difficult time for her, and then work with attorneys in the way to mitigate or help their client kind of get through the process so that we could all be in a positive resolution. So the holistic approach in the defense was just a really wonderful thing that I thought was very beneficial to the community, to the state, and to the people that we served.
If they didn't file formal competency, then what would they do?
So, I mean, it really depended on the case, right? It depended on what the charges were. So if you're looking at Class A, B, or C misdemeanors, if it were 3 Class A misdemeanors the person was charged with, and the person doing the screen thought they were likely not competent, we might recommend to file formal competency. If it was a Class B misdemeanor or just 1 Class A, we would say, okay, here's, Lynn's history, here's what we've seen, here's how, can we work with the prosecution to talk about what their history is, and if we divert them into this, would the prosecution be able to work with us? But all based on that social service mitigator's skill and expertise, and then the ability to coach or even go with the attorney into the courtroom or to talk with the prosecution about how can we resolve this case together. Sometimes it was a recommendation of, looking at this history, let's set the case over for 1 week. And with that, in that 1 week, in that jail, the mental health services could start, the medications could start, and we could see positive results. So it really is a case-by-case basis. There's not a specific answer on to do, because each individual is individual, right? So there's not a specific individual or route that was taken. Lots of options.
I just want to do a quick process check with our co-chairs. I think this is a fruitful conversation. We have about 20 minutes left. I just want to make sure we still want to go in this direction, or if we want to shift to intercept 3, I'm going to follow your lead here. I think we can really accomplish a lot of what we were going to do in committee outside through a survey instrument that we had planned anyway, but I just wanted to check in about how you wanted to use the last few minutes of the meeting.
Well, for me, it's up to the room how much the committee itself wants to keep going down this road, or if they feel like they have their questions answered. If there's still questions, I say we just keep going where we're at. And if we run out of questions,
feels like there's hands, sorry, the going, yeah. There are still questions. So I just wanted to make sure. All right. Yeah. Allison, are you okay with that?
Robert, back to the numbers you were doing, 190 days, you said, have you been able to tease out, I know Neil was talking about data, it would be helpful to know, is that 190 days because there are outliers like the intellectually disabled or traumatic brain injury? I mean, have you been able to tease out why those numbers are up there in terms of sorting out, is this an efficiency issue about how we're doing restoration versus it's some outliers that are making those numbers look a lot higher because we don't have a solution for those outliers?
Sure, we've done some analysis on this. The 190 days, yes, because I think typically it's around 150 to 160. So I think the month that we're 190 probably had to do with someone that's been here a really long time and got discharged, because we're counting them at discharge. I think that has a lot to do with it. We try to control for some of the permanently incompetent to proceed outliers, which should be mitigated by some of the statutes that are in place. We do think the Senate Bill 223 statute, where it basically says there's time frames based on your level of offense, it's only going to impact like 3 or 4 people total. So we did address for outliers. If you took out some of the more longer outliers, we're still looking north of 130 probably days, 100 around that time frame. But as you know, with averages, it's supposed to account for some of the outliers. So, but I think 190 isn't inflated for outliers. I think we really are more around 150, 160.
Robert, I just wanted to have 2 comments. Like, one, is the state hospital, now that it has electronic health records, planning to join Choreo so that like people who in the jail, we can see, what's happened in the state hospital, like what the treatment has been, and where the state hospital can then see what's happening in the community? Because sometimes it feels like we start a particular treatment in the jail, they go to the state hospital and they get a whole set of meds that we didn't think would have worked for them as easily, or we have records that they can't see for us. And the second comment is, people come back from the state hospital a lot of times on a long-acting injection or some kind of, or for example, clozapine, and they're restored. But in the community, they're homeless. They're not going to go and get their lab draws every week, or we can't afford to give them that injection because in the county jails, we don't have insurance to bill them. So that injection is like $1,500 or $2,500. So I think that probably causes some problems for us when they come back to us, or when we can't see the records.
So I do believe that, because I know that folks from the hospital are part of that conversation about Carrillo and including our responsibility with the jails, who are also part of the medication consistency work that's being done. So we can track these folks in and out of jails, but between hospitals as well. With that said, our EHR is less than a year old and it's not cooperating all the time. For folks that don't know, the electronic health record system, the state hospital was on paper, a little outdated until last spring. And there's really no such thing as a psychiatric hospital EHR off the shelf. So we've been working with a company called Cerner out of Minnesota to modify it. And I think we're trying to make sure we get all our internal controls well, and we're trying to add on these other things as well. We want to make sure that the things like what medication people are on are consistent and things like that internally.
So I have several different things, but I just wanted to say on the medication consistency, you could be purchasing through state purchasing, which has cheaper rates.
So but we get more cheaper than the state purchasing because.
Okay, well, never mind. Oh, because you're federally.
Because we are Denver Health, and so we have that.
340B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind then. So the one thing that I was interested in that you guys talked about was Maricopa County having the psychiatric centers, the drop-off centers, and we have walk-in clinics here in Colorado, but I wonder if it's different. I think there's some limitations for who can go to the walk-in clinics. And I know one of the ways that people get charged is when law enforcement, it takes a long time if you drop off at emergency room and they're tied up for a long time. It's easier to book into jail. And if they just see people, coming back out, they may go that direction. So I would be interested in hearing more about that, if that's a model that would be useful. And then the other thing is that we have a lot of different groups working on things in Colorado, and MHD CJS currently has a big package that they're proposing to their legislative oversight committee for supportive housing, which might be worth looking at. And then CCJJ at one point came up with a model for regional psychiatric jails. So
the CCJJ one is similar. They were interested similar to what the Arizona concept was. They were calling it psychiatric jails, but it really was more of a secure treatment center where somebody couldn't walk out, which, and I'll let Frank talk a little bit more about some of the providers that he represents as well. I think part of it is, in a walk-in center, the walk-in center itself as a provider has certain legal limitations on holding somebody against walking out the door. Where in the Arizona model, I'm pretty sure Arizona created legislation that allows where law enforcement feels more comfortable because they're not just going to walk out the door. That facility has the right to hold someone. In Colorado, you've got to meet the involuntary hold threshold no matter what clinical setting you're in to keep somebody from walking out the door. And I think that's where, at least, and you, Chief Harvey, you can weigh in. I think that's where some of the rub is, where you're worried about public safety and you don't know whether they're going to walk out the door in an hour or 2 hours because they're deemed not a harm to self or others.
Yeah, so this is Derek Harvey. We've actually been having some conversations about that. And prior to coming to Colorado, I actually worked in the state of Florida. And so one of our systems there was we did have receiving facilities that could accept someone who was pre-booking, so not necessarily with any actual charges filed or had a booking diversion to where they've actually been booked in and charged for that, because there's some legal issues that causes problems for prosecutors for that as well. But it relied on the civil commitment laws really to allow us to be able to stretch that definition of harm to self or others, because let's say, for example, it was a disturbance and somebody got punched. Well, clearly there's some harm there. And so I think the application of that is what allowed us to kind of stretch it maybe towards the 2765. So there would be some training issues there, but there also definitely are some statutory limitations to allow us to do that. And just systems in place in general. I was talking with Mr. Lane about this, that if our current systems pretty much across the state are, if we have somebody that reports a crime to us, we establish probable cause, then we either arrest or issue a summons, one of the two. And so we need some middle ground there. And I think there are a few districts that maybe have some sort of referral for charges, not a filing, but something that would allow the prosecutors, if this individual is dropped off, to have some discussions with the public defender's office. This is a more appropriate setting than jail, but the court is still involved, so they're not completely removed by dropping charges or taking them to the jail, and now they're fully integrated into the system.
And I want to make a comment real quick, and then we'll go to Frank if you have any more comments about the crisis system, and we'll go to Carly.
And I think you specifically asked Dan the question, so maybe I don't know if you know.
Yeah, thank you, Elton, but I think that answered it more thoroughly than I would have.
What you just talked about isn't unprecedented in Colorado for juveniles. So there are juvenile assessment centers where juveniles are dropped off. They are assessed. There is a sort of a conversation between the public defender, DA. There's sort of an agreement beforehand. So there's precedence for this assessment concept in Colorado for juveniles.
Well, and just to add to that, I mean, you know, because yesterday I was helping my folks in patrol, and we had an individual who had been arrested that morning who was a juvenile. Was actually failed to place, and so he was a runaway from the facility that we took him to. We got DHS involved, placement was put in again, and about 30 minutes later we were chasing that guy again. So I mean, there's definitely some issues there surrounding that, but I think that the concept is solid and definitely works in other places, and it works for law enforcement. And I think that's really kind of what we're asking here is, will police officers actually utilize a system like that? And they absolutely will. And I think it'll save on the front end, because we're not going to be doing, you know, screenings for competency. We're really taking that where it needs to be, which is a community mental health center or some other facility that has clinicians to be able to screen that.
I don't know if I have much more to add than what you described. I mean, I think as a state, when we implemented the crisis system, we overpromised and didn't have the infrastructure and the regulatory, you know, set up to deliver. And so just, I would agree with you. I think, you know, we passed a bill last year on facility licensure. I think we're going to set up an advisory committee that's really going to look at how we regulate facilities, behavioral health entities in Colorado. We're going to have a new concept that's a menu concept. The behavioral health entity license will be the sort of umbrella, choose different from a menu of services. So I think that at least will give us an opportunity to look at our different facilities in Colorado and give us a chance to evaluate if we need to make changes, whether they're regulatory or statutory. And so the other comment, I mean, I just think, you know, to Peggy's comment, CCJJ did last year approve a recommendation at the commission level for a facility, and I wouldn't call them a psychiatric jail. The idea was in response to individuals that may need emergency or acute psychiatric treatment, that we move that individual from a jail setting to a treatment setting where they could be treated by healthcare professionals. So that recommendation still sits at CCJJ. We need folks to take that on and sponsor that legislation, but that is something that exists and has been approved by the full commission.
Robert, now I'm giving you 5-minute warning, okay?
We'll find someone on CCJJ to come present.
Moses is actually chair of the NHC.
Oh, great. Colorado Criminal Juvenile Justice Committee, they had a great year ago with all this representation, and they advise on all criminal justice.
And what about the other one? Folks know what that other, I don't know, what's the other one?
Treating mental health disorders in the criminal justice system. Yeah. Probably there's a longer one, but Right, and so there's a legislative oversight committee of is it 5 or 6 members, and then there's a stakeholder task force that advises the legislative oversight committee.
And Robert, I also sit on the subcommittee, the housing subcommittee that Peggy was referring to, so.
I would love to just mention 2 last things. One is there is a group, Mental Health Colorado, along with other folks, including Disability Law Colorado, is looking at proposing legislation to defelonize some crimes that when they're committed, the person is in the midst of a mental health crisis and they have not caused serious bodily injury to EMTs, sheriffs, health workers, definitely still in the working phase, but that is something that we're looking at. And at some point, we do want this subcommittee to consider whether that's something we would want to get behind. The other thing is I understand that folks with IDD or TBI are not a huge portion of the people that we're talking about, but I definitely don't want us to lose sight of them. And I want us to remember that what we're talking about are people who are not competent, so they cannot face the criminal charges against them and are being held in jail or potentially even a state hospital without adequate supports and treatment that are appropriate for them. And while I think I do believe we have to divert those folks, I don't think we necessarily want to be thinking about it as what other institution can we divert them to, but is there a way to treat them in the community? We have, our regional centers do still exist some places as institutions. That's the model we're moving away from, but there are definitely supports out there for them. So if we can get to that, and I wanted to end with the question of, do we think that the current mental health evaluators or restoration providers or mental health treaters that are in the forensic system are equipped currently to deal with the IDD folks? I mean, just trying to find, is the gap that people who are providing these services say, gosh, I don't know how to work with people with IDD, or is it a different problem? Yes.
So I know there probably are not enough restoration to competency individuals who are working specifically with the IDD population, but I know there are more coming on board. I think they just trained 1 or 2 more, and I know a proposal for individuals to become, or organizations to become involved with the restoration to competency process was just re-released. And I know there are several groups that work in the IDD and autism space that are planning on replying to that. So I know there has been some effort. Again, that becomes a state issue because not everybody that applies is selected, but I know that there were people trained recently firsthand.
And Allison, I thought your question was on the broader mental health system and how prepared people feel. And we have, several surveys where people are consistently saying, I don't feel prepared, but I am interested in becoming prepared.
I think just to quickly bounce off of that, I think one of the big issues that we run into in rural communities is that limited space. When I find practitioners provide general practice, and you're asking my capable of 10 clinicians to be able to treat everything expertly as possibly as much as they can. I think that becomes a big barrier when we're talking about competency, when we're talking about restoration. And, I have one restoration provider for level Los Angeles and Orange County. And there's just a couple people in those counties, just a few. And the one person to make her an expert in all things that are associated with behavioral health is too big of an ask. And so I think when we talk about rural counties, that becomes such a barrier. It's already hard enough to find appropriately qualified and credentialed staff members, let alone get them the training, when 99% of those are up in Denver, and I've got to go to a hotel, I've got to send them out of work for a week, and now all their clients can't be seen regularly. So it's a barrier for rural counties to get people the things they need because everything's very Denver-centric. Yeah, no worries. It was really, we're kind of back.
All right. I just want to thank everybody for a really engaged conversation this afternoon. And again, thank you, Dan, for joining us. Because we went rogue on this day. I'm going to channel my inner Summer and kind of prepare you for some homework between now and next Friday, because we have really quick turnaround to the next meeting next week, right? It's next Friday. So what you can anticipate seeing from us probably tomorrow, going into the Labor Day holiday, is a survey that will reflect all of the work and feedback that you gave us around the recommendations from Intercept 3. So what we did was take a stab at revisions to language in those recommendations, reflecting on what you told us. We didn't get to number 7, so we're going to put that one out to you to respond to as is and give us feedback related to that one that we'll then try to close the loop on when we meet next Friday and move into Intercept 4. So not only do we need to do the survey to give us feedback about 3, we need to be prepared to talk about 4. And so we only have a week. So I know this is fast. I think this is the pace that we need to kind of get used to working under. You can probably tell I'm starting to feel a little more comfortable with it because I'm getting bossy, but that's what we're going to do next week. So you'll see a survey from us and an agenda for next Friday pretty soon. Go ahead, Summer. So just to reiterate, read Intercept 4 preparation for next week. And I think the other thing we can talk a little bit about is that for the survey, we will circulate it to the country, and then I think we'll post it on the website as well, and that way people from the public can go in if they have questions. Okay, great. And also to prep about October and anticipating this trip to Pueblo, I'm hoping we'll have some more details to share with that pretty soon.
Great. Tomorrow is Overdose Awareness Day. There are free pins on the table over there. Please take the free pin in recognition of Overdose Awareness Day. That is August 30th. Thank you. Anything else, Allison? Yep. Oh, great.